day 3 of the 2023 Responsible Raw Materials Annual Conference. As I'm sure you're all well aware now, we are discussing the topic of trust, with the title of this year's conference being Material Value Chains, the Criticality of Trust. Now, over the last couple of days, we've had 3 phenomenal sessions and been joined by a wide variety of individuals from across the entirety of materials value chains, including everybody from geologists who like to get their hands dirty, all the way through to politicians, regulators, investors, people who create equipment, etc. All of those different aspects that we need in order to make sure that we can find, mine, process, sell, etc., recycle all of this raw material in the most responsible way possible. We've also been joined by some fabulous experts who've got nothing to do with mining or raw materials, but are experts when it comes to trust. So be it through sharing tools and techniques in terms of how can you create or build trust and then hopefully maintain it between different stakeholder groups, through to individuals like John Crawley, who helped us finish off yesterday evening's session. And he was part of the Northern Ireland peace process 25 years ago. And he shared some fantastic insights with regards to how do you build trust between groups of people who really, really, really do not want to be anywhere near one another. So all of the talks that we've been through over the last couple of days are up on our website. So if you haven't managed to go and check that out yet, it's at responsiblerawmaterials.com. So very easy to go and find. If you click on 2023 conference, you will find the agenda for today's session. So all of our fabulous speakers who we will be welcoming all of their thoughts and perspectives into our virtual platform today. But you will also find, and I will just share my screen now so that you can see it. So there we go. There's the 2023 conference with the agenda that we've been working our way through. But also, if you click on the talks tab, you will find that we've been loading everybody's talks into here. So immediately you can, for example, click on Paul Eakin's talk from yesterday morning. You'll see that the recording is there together with his abstract and biography and any other links that might be useful with regards to that. Just a little hint, if you're trying to find someone's talk, then click on the little magnifying glass or the and type in, okay, who is it that you are looking for? Okay, so I'm looking for Paul's talk. So there's Paul Eakin's talk. We also had other Pauls speaking to us earlier on this week and also over the last few years, because of course we've been running these conferences since 2020, which has been absolutely fantastic. All of this is, of course, done for free. So we are not taking money from anybody to do all of this, which therefore means that we can bring all kinds of speakers to the table. So there are no affiliations or anything like that that may skew some of those discussions. Now, today, we're starting off nice and promptly because our first speaker, Alison George, is going to come to the stage and share with us her perspectives with all things trust. Now, Alison, I don't know if you have any slides or if you're just going to
don't have any slides. Going to speak authentically.
Excellent. That is truly beautiful, Alison. So what I'm going to do is immediately welcome Alison to our virtual stage. Everybody, please put your hands together for a virtual round of applause for the wonderful Alison. Alison, please take it away.
Thank you very much. So as Sarah said, good morning, everybody. I'm Alison George, and I'm also the head of programs and initiatives at an institution that's called the Development Partner Institute. So really, if I just explain a little bit about that, because that's the vein in which I got here, it's an organization that exists to accelerate mining for development. It was set up by 2 people, Mark Cutifani and Peter Bryant, to really think about new ways of doing mining, creating mining solutions, and to experiment with really sometimes difficult conversations that can propel the industry forward in a way that links with communities and different marginalized groups and does things in a different way. But I'm going to speak today just for 10 minutes and then have questions and answers, because I've had a long journey in the extractive and mining sector for 20 years. And there are a couple of things that I've picked up about trust and indeed equity along the way. And I'll speak for the second half about the work that we do at DPI and what I bring to that from my experience. So the question of trust, I really felt to look at it another way, which is what happens when trust is actually broken. And I've worked in fragile states, and I've worked with organizations, whether it's multilaterals or bilaterals, competing against one another for political space. And indeed, the mining industry has many political faces as well. So I think that when I look at my experience, I started off with something called the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative in 2001 and created the core of that. And it's now today a global standard. But I think that values underpins a lot of what we're talking about when we think about trust. So if you're building on broken promises or lack of respect for one another, or basically trauma. Some societies are traumatized by others historically, lack of inclusivity in decision-making, repackaging, reselling new ideas, or words not supporting behaviors, or constantly putting, interests above one another. Those are the things that are present when trust is absent. And I think that when I think about how we build trust, I've always, as a sustainability professional or as an individual, tried to create that in the projects or the relationships or the conversations or the collaborations that we work on and build. I feel that the way that the world with geopolitics and lots of things is shaping today, trust is indeed a really big part of that. And I see that there are lots of organizations and lots of individuals and lots of people trying to figure out what this means. And I think there's really good lessons learned when you stand on authenticity. I think that for us at DPI, if I can just speak there, we have 3 flagship programs. And I think about those things that I mentioned at the start being absent when we're trying to create programs that actually stand the test of time. So we're in the business of creating trust amongst investors, mining companies, communities, between different types of countries where there's an experience of perhaps colonization and those experiences, the development agenda, and with different governments, bringing different governments to the table. And I feel that one of the ways that DPI, for example, plays a big part is that there's sometimes trust broken. I've come from the multilateral and bilateral experience. And I think there is a space for a new type of development facilitator on the scene. So where you see geopolitics and sometimes some Southern Hemisphere countries not wanting to fully participate and work with some other countries, I feel that there is organizations like DPI that provide a neutral platform or provide honest conversations is really invigorating for lots of different people, especially where you have a lot of the private sector mining, deep mining experience, trying to figure out what are the solutions and the way forward, especially for the energy transition. So with DPI, I'll just speak about some of the things that we do. So we have a flagship project, which is known as the Responsible Sourcing Coalition, RESCO, and you have responsible sourcing in lots of different ways, but essentially what does that mean? What we've taken it to mean is we developed a 5-phased program. And at the very start of that, we saw that there's trust that's been broken with, I think, the younger generation on a global level in many ways. And what we have tried to do is to understand the perspectives of that younger generation, in particular, young people from mining jurisdictions across South America, across Africa, across and in Australia as well. We asked them, we posed the question, the future is X. So we know that we have all these targets for 2050 with the energy transition. We know that there's a lot of anxiety and broken trust and feeling and sentiment around what is being left behind as a legacy. So without being necessarily a technocrat or an expert, or what do you feel that responsible mining or responsible sourcing looks like to you? So we, surf the globe to understand these different perspectives, and then we've put them into what we're using as our guidance for responsible sourcing and mining. And we had some really in-depth perspectives, and we could see some differences. So some people thought environment was at the top of the agenda. Other people put development at the top of the agenda. Other people from different jurisdictions felt that, you know, why do I need to fly to Switzerland to get responsible gold? I exist in a mining country. I'd like to see mining develop in my region. So all of these things were really with the vein of building trust and indeed equity and understanding different perspectives. We tried not to be condescending and think, well, you know, what do you know about the energy transition? What do you know about this? Because people have a stake because they're going to be part of that. So we had lots of views from Peru, Bolivia, Tanzania, Zambia, as well as Australia. So different perspectives brought to the fore by young people and their ideas on the environment and their ideas about artisanal mining, where some people thought in certain jurisdictions we should ramp that up, as opposed to having large-scale miners that had historically, you know, perceived to have done X, Y, and Z. So it was really good, and we used that as a foundation and guidance. So we feel really promising that, you know, young people were able to share their views and indeed create trust with organisations like ourselves. And we also had Indigenous people as part of that, for want of a better term, people who rest on their land, and also different suppliers and engineers. So bringing different people together and being really honest about conversations. One of the strengths of RESCO is that it deals with not just the future as X, defining possibility, but it also has a focus on structural inequality across the value chain. So it calls out things that would create seismic shifts. So I talked earlier about when trust is absent, so repackaging and selling things in a different vein. So we talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about Indigenous communities in a way that is not trying to, in a way that's trying to be raw, if I can put it that way. The other thing that we work on to build trust, and I think when I look at what's absent, again, bringing in, is something called the Mining Innovation and Research Battlefield, which we run each year at the Mining Indaba. We had the inaugural battlefield in 2022. And again, this looks at young people, but it also tries to focus on bridging the gap with researchers and miners and different institutions. We want people to submit bids for this competition that wouldn't normally work together, and you are prioritized for that. So you could be a university working with an artisanal miner, working with a processor. So, you know, we want something different that's not been done before. We
let the cyborg continue a little bit.
So that
So I'm hoping that Alison will be able to catch up with us in a second. I think that
is a way we normally work together and creating. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We lost you for a little bit, but you're back.
Yeah. Okay. You all froze. Yeah. So that was just the innovation research battlefield. You know, bridging the gap between industry researchers and young people. So that's another thing that, you know, very passionate about, because when you see people, if you imagine Dragon's Den pitching on the stage together and being interrogated and feeling again as if they have a stake in the world that's to come or present day. The other thing that we work on, and I think about again where trust is broken, promises, lack of respect, or trauma of society where it can be absent. So bringing you know, working with countries to redefine, redevelop, reconfigure the way that they do mining. And so sometimes we have what's termed as country catalysts. And our most recent work is in Zambia, working in the Northwest region that connects Angola and DRC. So it's been a series of conversations and again, bringing together different types of people and working with the spirit of collaboration to create a pilot where you wouldn't attribute it to one mining company or one supplier or one government department, but everybody working together to create a project for that region that creates socioeconomic benefits, that enhances agriculture, that looks at linkages across the supply chain. So that's what we're currently working on as well. And as I said before, so bringing myself into it is, this understanding of what can be missing with my experience of fragile states and conflict, and with different multilaterals, bilaterals, different governments, what's missing, and then using that to infuse into the programs we have at DPI. And I feel also that values, as I said at the start, underpins it, because it's interesting, this term sustainability or responsible, because I think from the early days in 2000, when I started this journey, it was always strange to me that people would design projects that didn't consider a community or different types of people or different arrangements. And I see lots of shifting to create those now. But I would say that it's something that has always underpinned the way that I've believed that I should work. And that's what I bring to my day job as well. Thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that insight and that overview, Alison. Round of applause. I have a number of questions that I have scribbled down here, but again, to our other speakers, if you have questions, wave at me, as well as to our fantastic attendees either here in Zoom or, of course, those of you who are listening in on YouTube. So, Alison, just starting off with the work that you've been doing, listening to what do young people around the world actually want, did you get any really surprising answers, or was it all kinds of stuff that you were expecting to hear?
It definitely wasn't all kinds of stuff that I was expecting to hear. I think that the I don't know if I could say the personality shifted in the industry a little bit. So you would hear young engineers talking about, the way that they want to work with communities from the get-go, from the very beginning, and how they factor that into the way they do everything. And I think that over a 20-year span, that's a complete shift. To hear a young person, a young entry coming in, and also to then hear their ideas about bringing different types of people into the sector and the outreach that they're doing in their personal day-to-day job. So I felt it wasn't surprising, but I definitely felt very positive about it and very energetic. So there's a lot of doom and gloom when you think about responsible sourcing, the fact that you think everybody's been irresponsible and it's just chaos. So when you hear young people and not, so yeah, that was very good to hear what they're doing. I think also the idea that this collaboration with the artisanal, medium scale and large scale miners, especially in the South America, so just hearing that they think, well, these things should come together, or these things should just exist without the large scale. So it was very interesting to me to hear that, and also very much the focus on development. So I think in Australia there was a little bit of difference where young people were very much concerned with the environment in a way that we would see here in the UK, Sarah, and in maybe Africa and South America, that wasn't necessarily the case. The case was that people felt that they'd lived with the land in ways that were not disturbing and would continue to do so, but that also development was key. So arguably those represent some of the things we see at a global level in conversations as well. But yeah, I think the key thing for me was the energy that they had, because if you just pay attention to the news and some of the technocrats, and you just feel a lot of doom or gloom. So it was really exciting to hear that people want to take control and be responsible in the world that's to come.
Great. Now, you mentioned the word collaboration in there. And of course, we've been hearing from people who've got fantastic projects all over the place at the moment. So a question to you, which is one that we've been thinking about a lot within Responsible Raw Materials. How do you collaborate with all the other groups that are doing similar projects to yourselves? Have you got any hints or tips with regards to that?
I think that's an excellent question, because sometimes I would say that when I talked about repackaging and selling afterwards, so sometimes you can miss the mark with lots and lots of different talking shops and forums and everything else. I think it's important to have this kind of thing that we're having now, Sarah. I think that's a really good platform, because then you get to see what other people are doing. And then you get to learn and hear and think, right, this aligns with what I'm trying to achieve. So I think it's constant conversation, and then aligning yourself with like-minded people, and sometimes doing projects together. I think that when I look at, again, the discussion on trust, even working in a multilateral and bilateral space with some of the agencies, there can often be, you can see this with mining companies as well. People want to attribute this to me. All those narcissistic tendencies that we see in individuals across organizations or with organizations themselves. So I think it's constantly opening up, having these types of platforms, thinking about projects that we can do together, and sitting down at the table and creating those. Because I think for it's not only about pooling resources, but it's also about bringing lots of ideas to the table and then reconfiguring something to, create a better target, a better hit of what we're trying to achieve. And so we've done that a little bit. I think with DPI, we get different mining companies to come to the table, and maybe sometimes quite uncomfortably for them because there's a vulnerable space, but to say, you create this project together for this region in Zambia, because it's to all our interests. If things are operating in this way, there's infrastructure, in place, there's, you can have one supplier giving you X, Y, Z. So again, it really is about those kind of things in a tangible form after the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alison. Unfortunately, our time is up, so we need to move across to Jamie next. But everybody, round of applause for the fabulous Alison George. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. So we're now going to go from some truly awesome projects, as you've just heard Alison outline, to the wonderful world of Digby and the founder and CEO of Digby, Jamie Strauss. Now, Jamie, I will let you introduce Digby to everybody here, but also I know that we're going to dive into that wonderful world of how do you build trust between mining companies and also investors as well, which is a topic that we have been dipping in and out of over the course of the week so far, but I'm really looking forward to hear what you've got to say. So everybody, please welcome to our virtual stage, Jamie Strauss. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what on earth is this thing called Digby?
So thank you so much indeed, and really honoured to be back here for I'm thinking it's the third or fourth year, I can never remember. Yes, as you explained, I founded Digby. I've spent 35 years in mining finance. I know the investor world extremely well, globally, really, but also the mining individual companies. And I really wanted to give something back to the industry. And then I met up with Sarah about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was just after a chance meeting that I had had with two people, Evie Hambro from BlackRock and Mike Barton from Orion, both of who asked me to use the Digby platform to ultimately come up with an ESG solution for the mining industry. And what we agreed on fairly quickly was we needed to remove confusion to help these companies navigate, know what to disclose, but also to provide standardized data out to these different institutions and other stakeholders, to allow the mining industry to raise credibility, which is really where I think we're today coming back to, and raise trust in what the industry, how it operates and how it intends to operate in the future as well. Equally, to provide a communication platform with regards to ESG so that it can go not only to the stewards of ESG, the investors, but also to insurers and to communities and other stakeholders within the mining industry. So we launched a couple of years ago. It's been a really heartwarming progress. The feedback's outstanding. We've really enjoyed, I think, with the team at Satala, looking at particularly the companies that are coming to second and now third year renewals, how that's progressing, the impact it is having in the boardroom on culture, on operations, and going through. And ultimately, I'll leave the introduction to this is, I think trust can be built through transparency and engagement and measurement and ultimately communication of data when it's asked correctly and when it's assessed appropriately and therefore communicated to the right different stakeholders. So I'll leave that introduction as it is, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Jamie. So let's just dive straight into through the eyes of an investor. And of course, they can take many different forms. For an investor to trust an opportunity enough to actually give some of their money and put it into that opportunity, what do they need? What does that actually look like to almost say, yes, I trust you enough? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in fact, I might start off by saying, I think everyone knows the politicization of ESG or sustainability to some extent. And the most important statement was the head of State Street, or head of their sustainability, who was an open Republican, spoke at another conference. And he said, look, forget the whole politicization of it. ESG, when it's done properly, provides us with the means to mitigate risk within our portfolio, and that is our primary job. So the important thing here is, what do they need in order to allow them to have the trust in that data? And ultimately, they need to have data which they can trust, which covers all of the spectrum of ESG, which relates to that company, project, whatever it happens to be, in whatever industry it may be, and in a way that it can continue to assess and monitor that on an ongoing basis and integrate it within their process. It's very similar to looking for whether or not a company is going to deliver 1 million ounces of gold or whatever it is over a period of time. They need to have this they need to know what that company's intention is. Is it in the culture of that company? And if it is, then to be able to assess that to see whether or not that management is delivering on that. And if they can do that, they can raise the trust on it, which also means, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest this, that a well-structured ESG type company has a better structure internally, which therefore lowers intrinsic risk within the business.
And so with that, Jamie, in terms of, so that they want to get their hands on robust data that gives them the indication of, do we understand what your intention is? And are you actually doing all of this? Do you believe that the investors actually know what data to ask for?
No, difficult, because the answer is no. If it was a binary answer, it's got to be no. But it's much more nuanced than that. We've got to understand that the world of investment is hugely nuanced in itself. You've got fund managers who just need to know whether or not a company is embracing ESG, and they've got the confidence in that. Then they've got companies, obviously, and investors who are looking for deep dive due diligence down to the minutiae. And I think we've come a long way. But I think the problem with the mining industry is it touches so many areas within that ESG space that I think that is been a problem for most investors, because they don't know what to ask when it comes down to the mining sector. How do they get involvement with biodiversity protection, or how do they get involvement with local social communities or local communities and wherever they may be? How do you create procurement and local economies around mines which go beyond the life of that mine? All of this is really nuanced, complex. I would not necessarily complex, but nuanced stuff, which most groups don't know. So therefore, you go down the consulting route or whatever it is to get this data. And in reality, what we could do is we can actually bring that forward through this DIGB solution to be able to give a map of that, allow management to put out their roadmap of the future, and then allow those investors to access the bits they need to, and if necessary, go deeper dive in on the back of that.
And so with that, Jamie, obviously over the last few years, with regards to organizations telling the world, okay, this is what we're doing with regards to ESG, many of them have been accused of greenwashing. Yep. How do you cut through that accusation, I guess, of greenwashing, and also the trap that so many organizations can fall into, where they do start greenwashing without actually meaning to go there, if that makes sense?
Well, I think in a way, I'm going to go back to what Alison was just saying in that great interview or talk just before. And she said there's a real energy and people wanting to take control. And I think, look, the mining industry doesn't have much credibility. I think we all accept that here. But we've got to earn the trust. And this industry, and there are jurisdictions, I'd particularly focus on Australia at the moment, which I think is really I think driven maybe by a new government and some other laws coming in. I'm not sure exactly where to pinpoint the change, but there's been such a fundamental change in the last 12, 18 months. And they get the benefits of ESG. They get the benefits that it has with regards to lower risk and therefore potentially lower cost of capital and improved valuations, improved recruitment opportunities, etc. And I think this whole greenwash thing, human beings are human beings. They will be what they're being. But I think when the mining industry has the opportunity to leave the legacy behind with new management teams evolving and creating a new legacy, shall we say, of being ahead of the curve and taking an opportunity, using that word Alison says, energy, to actually portray not what history has effectively painted this industry, but actually taking a whole new chapter forward and actually getting on top of that greenwash thing and actually proving through transparency and engagement that there are real actions being taken to effectively be more sustainable, whatever that may mean in different people's eyes, to be more sustainable in an operation within the boardroom and have that culture. So it's difficult to answer because humans will be humans and they're always going to be bad actors. But I do think, and you've helped so much on this journey that I've been on, if you ask the right questions, if you go through the right process, and it's a robust process through an independent assessment, and then have that transparency capability to encourage, make sure that people look in on it as well, and ask people to look at it on a forward-looking basis. This has been one of Adam Matthews's big things, I think, at the Church of England, is if you don't have forward-looking things, then things can't be, if everything is backward-looking, it's out of date before you've started looking at it. And it's not usable as a means of management action when it comes to making decision-making, or board action when it comes to decision-making process. So I don't think any of us should assume that greenwash is going to go, but I do see so much energy within this mining industry, particularly from, I think some leadership from some of the major companies, but with the new management teams coming in and really getting this and understanding the benefits of valuation and other benefits that can come through ESG.
So with that, Jamie, I guess what you're describing there is a huge amount of change that's going on at the moment, which is great. Now, focusing in on that word of change, traditionally, mining has been seen as very, very high risk, and especially exploration, as something to invest in. And I guess there's a very specific group of investors who traditionally would have been open to investing within mining. Do you see that changing going into the future? So, for example, if mining can show the world that actually, we can do this in a responsible manner, and actually there are all of these opportunities in front of us, does that open the door to a different group of investors, for example?
Sarah, my one single goal with my hat on with regards to historically being involved in the financial industry. Obviously, we want this, the industry to be good and to have better impact on the ground and communities to be better off and everything. But the mining industry, the opportunity from an investment point of view, I've never seen anything so big in my life. The opportunity to turn the smallest pool of capital that any industry, this is a $1 trillion industry. It runs on a pool of capital that is shrinking day in, day out. And it's got headwinds over the last 2 or 3 years because all of these traditional funds have become green, and they're certainly not going to put a mining company into that as their first investment, because that doesn't do too much good from a marketing point of view. So we've got such a huge opportunity to turn this to account. And the beta on that is so big, as Daniel Davidson, who's the head of, who's an MIT professor and spoke at PDAC and runs the Energy Breakthrough Technology Fund for Gates and Bezos, in his panel speak, he says, what would you imagine a new hypothetical mid-sized company producing critical minerals that is embracing ESG and has no legacy? What do you think it would be valued on a cash flow basis? And the conversation went around and everything. They centered on somewhere between about 14 and 17, 18 times cash flow. BHP and Rio Tinto trade on 4.6 and 4.8 respectively today. That's a 3 times uplift in valuation by doing nothing. That's forgetting the critical minerals boom, and all the rest of it. It's purely a matter of reputational risk that we have to remove. And what is even more impressive from the data that we got, actually from my panel at PDAC this year, was we were looking at the correlation between ESG ratings of the metals and mining sector using Thomson Reuters data and the cost of capital. Now, it came out completely different to what we thought. We thought the sector would be poorly perceived and had a very high cost of capital. Well done on the cost of capital. It's the worst in the industry. In fact, it's the cost of equity which is the worst in the industry. The cost of debt actually is not quite as bad. But what was most interesting was where the metals and mining sector is based on the Thomson Reuters data. And it's in the top quartile. It's in the top quartile. Now, everybody can have an argument as to whether that's right, wrong, or whatever. But what I would actually say is the sector's been doing ESG for 20 odd years. It's been doing programs locally, socially, environmentally. It's had regulations put onto it. It's done this. There's been a corporate governance overhaul. There's been mining codes introduced, et cetera, et cetera. So perhaps it's not so surprising when you actually open the lid and you actually look at individual things that this sector is actually reasonably well rated, not just reasonably well rated, very well rated. But there's a communication gap and a trust gap between the cost of capital, which you can invertly say is the valuation of the sector or the cost of equity, and therefore the position which it sits in with regards to ESG. So we need to go back to your question is, we need to build the trust in order to allow the reputational risks to be removed. And I truly believe, being slightly commercial here, I truly believe what we have built with regards to Digby allows those investors and other stakeholders to be able to hang their coat on and suddenly say, yes, I can invest in this sector because I now have a way to means to monitor and track this in a trusted basis. The opportunity is literally one of the largest investment opportunities I have seen in my lifetime. If we get it right, if we do it properly, and if there are leaders who embrace and take this on and go forward. From the smallest companies, as Alison was saying, you know, right from the early stage of exploration, all the way through to the bigger companies who need to standardize and improve the communication of what they're putting out.
So, Jamie, I think you're listening to what you're saying there, the potential that's sitting on the table, that 14 to 17 times valuation is just huge with regards to what I guess exploration, development, mining companies are used to. I wonder if I bring in Ludovine on this, because I could see that Ludovine was very excited by some of what you were saying there. Ludovine, do you have any questions for Jamie?
Yes and no. These are things that we've discussed at length. I think what's really interesting is that, as Jamie was saying, there are other stakeholders who are now circling the mineral investment space. I'm thinking typically of OEMs, some midstream capacity, sometimes also linked to geostrategic positioning. You've got countries that are now backing fully the development of midstream capacity and trying to use that to change the flows. The value of mining investors' capacity to explain what they have been doing, their stewardship principles, and how they are performing and how the industry is performing is a big part of making that new investment pool available. So I think, you know, where I see the most value from the work that Digby does and others is actually to take things up a notch, to demonstrate the stewardship by mineral investors, by royalty companies. So almost, you know, going up to the next stage of saying, okay, who's the next person we need to convince? And I know that that's part of your strategy, and I think that's a big part of the opportunity today.
Yep, I would agree wholeheartedly. I mean, the goal is to pronounce this wider, louder, and everything, and give everybody the opportunity. And, you know, I haven't had the chance to listen to all of the talks yet, but this affects every single one of us. And I spoke at a dinner last week, and we've got to stop. The opportunity here is to stop looking at the cycles, which we have no control over, and to do things internally, which we can control. And given that we're the bottom of the ladder with regards to respect and valuation, the upside is so much bigger as a result of it. The relative arguments are so much smaller. So if we focus in on, if we take the opportunity and embrace the world of ESG and do it properly and get leaders to pronounce that, and there are leaders who are doing this, and if we can do that, then we can have that impact across the entire spectrum of the speakers here today. No, there's no reason why the mining industry cannot be larger than the oil and gas industry within a few years. Valuation and also probably critical mineral production increasing. So the opportunity here is now and present, and it's exciting.
I think with that, Jamie, that is a phenomenal note to say thank you very much and finish on. Really exciting. And I think what you've brought to the table here is that perspective coming in from that investor space and really the opportunity that is there. But so much of the challenge that we need to be able to address is that trust. How do we build trust with those individuals to make them feel comfortable?
And we're not there yet. And I think that's the important, one can have aspirations, excitement and enthusiasm and passion, but you've still got to make that bridge. And we've not yet got there, despite evidence that, as Ludovine was just alluding to, there is evidence of it beginning to happen. We've got to go further.
Fantastic. So with that, thank you so much, Jamie, for coming and joining us today. Brilliant as ever. Round of applause. Thank you very much, Jamie. Great. So we started off today talking about a number of phenomenal development projects, as articulated by Alison. We've then gone into that wonderful world of investment, and we've just heard from Jamie. If we can actually build this trust between different parties, especially on the investment space, there is phenomenal opportunity that's coming at us at the moment. We're now going to go across to Chris and Emily, who are from one of the Horizon Europe research projects called Vector, who are going to explore some of those aspects with regards to trust inside a research project. So everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Chris and Emily.
Hi, thank you very much for having us. Delighted to be here today to present to you all. I'm Chris Dockey. I'm a project officer for Project Vector, something that I'll give you an introduction to, an overview of in a moment. And I'm joined by Emily Lewis, a colleague who leads on ethics management and coordination within the project consortium. So hopefully the technology is working and everybody can see my screen okay. And as I said, we're delighted to present to you today on Project Vector, transparency and ethical governance of a European research project. So I'm just going to caveat now that there's a lot of QR codes that will pop up around your screen. So please be the eager participants that have their smartphones ready to scan them all, get all of the information out of us, learn about what we're doing, come to future events, partake in part of this trust building and engagement with stakeholders and our ethical framework and governance framework as well, please. So giving you that warning now, because the first one is already here. What is the Vector project? The Vector project is an EU Horizon and UKRI co-funded research project running over 3.5 years. We're a year into the project. We're a project that focuses on assessing the challenges to a domestic supply of critical raw materials or critical minerals within Europe. And there are plenty of ways to find out more about our project. You can scan this QR code that will take you straight to our website. You can find us on Twitter. You can email us at our email addresses and interact with us regularly. We want to engage with everybody who's interested in our project. So the project is motivated by looking at the EU Green Deal, where we find that we require a sharp increase in the supply of raw materials to meet the objectives laid out in that and decarbonisation pathways. And that to extract these materials responsibly and sustainably, we have to understand all of the challenges that might impact upon that. So those aren't just those that we think of in the geological context as geoscientists or environmental as biologists or geographers and such, or social as social scientists. It's all of them together and also how they interact. They're not siloed and things that take place on their own as challenges. We live in a complex world, which particularly with relationship to policy and thinking about how we might sustainably and responsibly resource these materials. They're things that have interactions and we have to take those into account. So Vector takes a step back, looking at how we might begin to understand that complex web of dynamics and then use those, having assessed them, to integrate them into the development of solutions that put people at the very center of them, make them workable and things that can be actioned as a result of that integration into different tools, communications and dissemination pathways and outputs through research. So how are we achieving this? Well, we have a fantastic partnership of 18 different members across the EU and UK. So we're an interesting project from the perspective that we've carried on with UK involvement within the European Research Scheme. We have specialists across all of those different research themes, not just academic research institutions that bring cutting edge knowledge of an understanding of those research landscapes, but also coupled with industry members within geoscience, non-government organizations, education institutions, to really help to disseminate and create genuine impact that actually leads to a change in our understanding of how these different challenges interact within a European landscape, and then designing those as best practice to be taken forward and apply to the rest of the world. And as you can see, imagine, and we touched upon this in Alison's talk, and Jamie also touched upon it, the idea of sort of trusting collaboration. You can imagine there's an awful lot of that required to make these projects work and run, and that's something that I'm very happy to talk about later on, but primarily going to touch on our ethical framework here as a project. So how does Vector work in bringing together those different data streams? Well, we design a suite of social vectors through primary research that are assessing perceptions, values, and attitudes towards the sourcing of critical raw materials for the green transition. So understanding how our basic understanding of the sector, our thoughts on a day-to-day basis interact with values with response to the economy, the environment, other different aspects, and then formulate together to create an overall attitude towards the sector, building those layer upon layer with geoscience vectors that try to test the efficacy and the viability of cutting-edge, minimally disruptive technologies in order to investigate mineral deposits under the subsurface of our Earth. So looking to see that interaction with the environment and social by really putting those methodologies to the test when looking at mineral exploration within Europe. And we'll integrate those within individual tools that will present all of that data together in an easy to understand set of interfaces that allow the results to be accessed all together in one place by anyone. So what does that actually look like in a suite of outputs, rather than me arm waving about all of the fantastic problems we're going to solve? It looks like a series of research deliverables in terms of 2D, 3D, and 4D geological models, but then packaged to allow ease of access and understandability for different stakeholder groups, taking into account how different individuals, how you interact with that data. And that's something that we'd love to hear more about, so that we can design them to be most beneficial to all of our stakeholders, and doing that through those minimally disruptive technologies, be that passive seismic imaging or electrical conductivity analysis, rather than going out and digging holes, and comparing those two legacy data to test that efficacy. And then within the social science side, we have the development of things like continued professional development platforms. So trying to create different outputs that allow, for example, particularly with emphasis to geoscientists, you to see your work through the lens of other stakeholders, help people to understand within their work what other stakeholders think of it, to help them foster and develop that trust within their own work, help to set it within that context. Social simulators to understand through decision tree pathways that we ask stakeholders to interact with, how those attitudes are brought about by those values that we discussed earlier, education facing materials, and also outreach to hear from you at science and arts festivals. There'll also be primary research developing new innovative techniques and tools, such as social value indices, that try to really distill all of those different pathways of research down into one single easy to use tool that allows anybody to just access it and see quite easily on a sliding scale and bring those together, data sets together, and really make them make individuals aware of how that research comes together and combine. And then those will be integrated into data tools, be those data platforms, map-based data tables, infographic design, or even live reporting from news outlets and social media. And if you want to hear more about the overall project that I've just introduced you to from the fantastic work package leaders within the partnership and consortium tomorrow, please attend our launch event. And we're really going to hover here and see if you can all scan your QR code. Thank you, Sarah. I can see you signing up to our Eventbrite right now. That's fantastic. Thank you. It's a free event to come and hear more about the research that we're doing. And particularly, we want to engage with you. We want to hear from you your immediate perceptions of the project, and ask us questions about the research that we're undertaking. So please come along, hear how we're getting on in more detail than I'm presenting today, and yeah, look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Emily now.
Hi everyone. So I'm going to talk a bit about project ethics and the Vector project. And I think what we're going to talk about over the next couple of slides might not seem like anything novel from a commercial or private sector perspective, but Vector is the first Horizon project to have ethics requirements and an ethic work package that's mandated by the EU in the grant agreement. So this is quite new for this kind of research project, and there's no template for how the requirement should be implemented. So we're kind of making it up as we go and learning as we go. The main reason that the ethics framework has been put in place, I guess, and mandated by the EU in the way that it has, is to build trust between the project and the public, and also within the project between the work packages. So it's got sort of a dual purpose. I think the first thing to say about project ethics is that what we're talking about under this umbrella in terms of Vector is really more akin to good governance than ethics per se, but with a skew towards a few specific risks or issues that the project may touch on that could have broader ethical implications. So things like machine learning and the use of AI, social acceptability of mining, and influencing and educating young people. Due to the mix of disciplines involved in the project, there are a lot of different understandings of what ethics is, and as a result, there are various competing requirements to determine what is ethical in different circumstances. So we've got social research ethics at play, we've got geoethics, etc. And we recognise that these ethical matters are better managed by experts in their affected field. So these matters are dealt with within the work package, and in relation to specific research proposals. So, for example, when one of the work packages submits a proposal, that will go through its university ethics review process, and that's not managed under the umbrella of the project. So those responsible for project ethics in Vector are responsible for dealing with the broad implications of ethical risks and issues on the project itself, rather than the research, and to ensure that project impacts and risks are fully considered. Next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. So this is the governance structure that we've got in place for the project. As you can see, on the left-hand side, we've got general project governance, and on the right-hand side, we've got specific ethics governance bodies. And both sides reflect each other in that we've got a management level, which is internal, and then we've got an advisory level, which is external. And on the ethics side, we've got the Independence Ethics Committee and the Ethics Advisor. Next slide, please, Chris. So one of the first steps that we took when the project kicked off was to appoint an ethics advisor, and we appointed Quinton Newcomb to this role. Quinton is a governance specialist, and he has been responsible so far for helping us set up the governance structure for the project and in recruiting appropriate experts to the Independence Ethics Committee. So Quinton will chair the committee, and he'll be joined by subject matter experts, so in the fields relevant to the substance of the project, so AI, social research, that kind of thing. Yes, and related to the project anticipated risk areas. Next slide, please, Chris. So a bit more about the Independent Ethics Committee. We're currently looking for members of the committee, so this is a shameless plug. we've had a few applications so far, and we're going to be closing the recruitment for that soon. So if you're interested in what Chris said about the project more broadly, come along on Friday to the Vector launch and get in touch with us if you think you'd like to be a member of the Independent Ethics Committee. As I said, the committee will be chaired by Quinton, and the role of the Ethics Committee is to provide some support to Quinton in his role by providing a forum comprised of subject matter experts on ethics to debate ethical issues and decide on appropriate courses of action in each case to help the project proceed on an ethical basis. Next slide, please, Chris. So these are the specific areas and the specific expertise that we're looking for from members of the committee. So again, if this is you, please get in touch with us. We're hoping to have a mix of this expertise and experience across the members of the committee. Chris, I don't know if you have anything further to say on ethics before we close off.
Yeah, I think that it's just a new example of trying to build and foster that trust between the project and stakeholders by having that presented transparently. And we're really looking for engagement throughout the project to reflect upon how we conduct the project and get engagement continuously to keep building that trust and try and foster that within a large research partnership. So please do keep in touch with us and keep actively involved. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris and Emily, for giving us a beautiful overview of the Vector project. Thank you very much. And also, as beautifully articulated by Emily, the ethics structure of that. We've got a couple of minutes available for questions. And Kimmo, I don't know if you want to come in and comment on this at all, because given your experience from a geological survey perspective and also research projects within Europe, do you have any comments with regards to the ethical aspects, be it with regards to the research or the interaction between academics and industry and government? Do you have any comments on that?
Well, thank you, Sarah. I was following very closely the presentation, and I just very briefly comment that you are touching, from my point of view, exactly the right issues. So this research project is very, very topic. And I say my further comments when I have my presentation. Thank you.
We don't want to steal your thunder. Fantastic. Excellent. So Chris and, well, I guess Emily, to start with regards to pulling together the ethics committee or the independent ethics committee, how easy is that proving at the minute to work out, well, what kind of skill sets, what sort of background needs to be in there in order to be able to robustly reflect that broad range of ethics that's required by the project? Is it easy or difficult?
It's been quite tricky so far, to be honest. And as Chris said, there are loads and loads of different partners involved in this project and lots of different opinions. And I think there has been a lean in the project towards building the committee from ethics experts. And whilst we think that's an important voice to have on the committee, we don't want it to just be people who are experts in ethics. We want people who understand the subject matter of the project and have experience in some of the specific risk areas that we think that the project is going to face. So yes, ethics experts, research ethics experts, but also people who understand about data management, human rights and social justice, environmental and social governance, and AI and machine learning. So yeah, it's been a bit tricky, and those are quite a broad range of skills. So we're still on the hunt at the moment, but we're getting there.
And so with regards to that broad range of skills, and I guess, Emily, this is for you, and then perhaps for Chris as well. How have you been finding it within the project? Because from my experience, so I'm originally a geologist, and so I know how I think. But when I then need to listen to what a social scientist is really trying to say, I have to listen really, really hard because I don't necessarily really understand what they're saying. So, Emily, from the ethics committee perspective, will you be taking any of the tools and techniques we've been exploring this week, perhaps, in terms of trying to bring together? There we go. There's a leading question. Using those thoughts, and then perhaps to Chris in terms of the actual project partners themselves.
Yeah, I think I'll be using a lot of reflective listening going forward in particular. Yeah, we have, I think actually the main challenge for Vector is getting everybody together to really listen to each other, because there are so many different people coming from different sciences, even different areas, who have different opinions and also just talk past each other. So one of our main jobs is to really get people in the same room, sitting down and hearing and understanding what each other is saying. And I think in terms of the Independent Ethics Committee, like that's what we're hoping, one of the roles that we're hoping having the committee in place will help facilitate, I guess. Because at the moment, when we're having these conversations, everybody who's involved in the conversation is involved in delivering Vector, and having this independent voice that can give that independent view, I think is going to be a really important part of building trust between people working within the project.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. Chris, how about your perspective?
Yeah, I think that Emily hit the nail on the head a lot there. From my perspective, trying to get partners to talk to each other, I think that you find that people are really willing to be in these fantastic collaborative partnerships. The barrier to me can be a lack of common language, which is nobody's fault, which is kind of what makes it hard, because you don't want to say, oh, well, if everybody employed one tool or another tool, it would just fix it. You've got to start using that reflective listening, because it can help develop that common language by having those exchanges where you say, so I'm hearing this, you can check, because one word in one discipline can mean a very different thing to another discipline. And I think we found that a little bit in just recognizing where those just accidental miscommunications can happen. So as Emily said, getting together, having those conversations, and in the world where technology is fantastic, Zoom's been brilliant in that, but also looking forward to having our in-person meetings that we're starting to get a bit more regularly organized, so that we can have that better communication with body language, all of those things, to just really bring everyone together and repeat that, to make sure that it's not a one-time fix. It's a commitment.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I guess with regards to that language, it's a case of it's the technical and the professional language, but then actually also as well, whatever language people are speaking, because this is across Europe. And whilst we're conducting everything in English, a whole lot can get lost in translation. So thank you so much, Chris and Emily, for coming and being so open and honest, really, with regards to the Vector project, and also all of that trust that is being built between lots and lots of different people therein. And we will all, of course, dial in on Friday to the formal launch event. So thank you very, very much, Chris. If you want to stick the link to all of this in the chat, please do feel free to do so. Round of applause. Excellent.
Thanks, everyone.
So moving from that world of research, and where we suddenly realize, hang on a second, even as a geoscientist, I'm actually maybe stronger if I also work with, say, social scientists, environmental scientists, etc., as well, to be able to build that whole. I'm so pleased to be able to welcome to our virtual stage someone who, well, I guess is a geoscientist, but who I have had the absolute pleasure of working with for many years. And I met Vanessa when I was fairly early on in my career, and just have had huge respect for Vanessa. So please give a round of applause to the fabulous Vanessa Litfeld. Thank you very much. Now, Vanessa, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody and let us know what it is you're up to at the moment?
Well, thank you very much for that. And honestly, I was blown away by being asked to be here today. So it's a really good opportunity for me to do something a little bit different. And you'll hear as I go through, hopefully as we go through the discussion, I'm not going to profess to be an ESG expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm absolutely passionate about it. And having been in the industry for 30 plus years, I am convinced that there is a way of doing what we do so that we are more responsible and we don't carry on repeating mistakes of the past. So as I said, I've been in the industry for 30 years, done lots and lots of different things, from exploration through mining to new product developments, to a little bit of closure, to change management, leadership uplift, all things in between. and had the fantastic opportunity of working with Setara as a group, but also doing a whole bunch of other work in risk management, yeah, you name it, a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to maybe delve into the things that I'm not so good at. So I've had to do a bit of background reading. So I'll be referring to my notes a little bit as we go, but looking forward to the discussion.
There is no shame to referring to notes at any point in time. And I think, Vanessa, what you were saying there in introduction is so we all identify as something. So yes, I'm a geoscientist originally, but I'm passionate about ESG, just like you. So just because you're one thing doesn't make kind of constrain you to be really excited in something else. So with regards to that research and perhaps some of those notes, when we talk about trust, what does that mean to you?
So for me, it's actually quite intangible. So it sort of has to go down to a belief or a confidence that one person has in another person or an organization, that they're honest and reliable, capable and willing, I think, is an important part of that, of fulfilling the promises and commitments that they make. So because it is so fundamental to all of our relationships, we need it, because we form all of our close connections by having this confidence and belief that, somebody's got, my best interests at heart. And without that, we can't collaborate and we can't cooperate. So when I did that little bit of research, I went and I found that Mayer and others in 1995 said that there were 3 fundamental elements of trust, and that was integrity, ability, and benevolence, and that trust really does exist when all 3 of those converge together. So when we look at this in a little bit more detail, that integrity is really a perception that a set of acceptable principles and standards are being followed by the person or organization that you're trying to establish this trust with. And then if I think about ability, that really is that knowledge and skills to have influence in a specific area. And then the last one that we take it for granted that benevolence is a measure of wanting to do good. But I think Alison said earlier, it can't only be for monetary profit. It has to be a measure of that real want to do good. So that's where I've come to in terms of what does it actually mean when I think about trust.
That's brilliant, and thank you so much for explaining that in such a succinct manner. That's brilliant. So if we take that then, Vanessa, and we apply it to the raw materials value chain, sort of in its entirety, we all talk about, there's a lack of trust, et cetera, but what do you think are some of those key stumbling blocks that we face within raw materials?
So for me, I really thought about this, but I'm going to narrow it down to just the one that I think is the biggest one. And that is this apparent oxymoron of what I call trusted mining. And in preparation for this, I actually asked ChatGPT to explain trusted mining as an oxymoron. And the simplicity of its response was actually quite confronting. So please forgive me, but I am going to read this because it was really quite enlightening. So trusted mining can be considered an oxymoron because the 2 words seem to contradict each other. Trusted implies that something is reliable and honest and dependable, while mining refers to the extraction of minerals and resources from the earth, often with little regard of environmental impact and ethical concerns. The word mining can also bring to mind images of unscrupulous individuals or corporations exploiting natural resources for their own gain. Combining these 2 words, trusted mining, suggests then that it is possible to extract resources from the earth in a way that is both trustworthy and sustainable, which can be seen as paradoxical or contradictory. And when I read that, I was just like, whoa, hang on a minute. That is actually quite confronting for somebody having been in the industry for so long, because I genuinely believe it is possible. But, you know, we have to get this right, and we have to get it better, because, you know, it is fundamental that we do carry on doing the mining that we do, because we do need the raw materials for our net zero world in future. But without the trust, then how do we get there? So that to me is the biggest stumbling block, is this apparent oxymoron. Yeah, let's leave that one there.
I love the fact that you went to ChatGPT, and I think this is something we won't go into that avenue of AIs and the potential opportunities and threats, etc. But what it does give us is a really interesting reflection of, okay, based on all of that data up until, when was it, August 2021, which is the learning data set for ChatGPT, what did the internet think? And
Exactly.
That is, yeah, it's damning. So what do you think are some of those, I guess, those failures within the raw materials value chain that has led to the likes of the internet spit along with the code that sits behind ChatGPT to govern what it spits out? What do you think are some of those failures that are really triggering that response from ChatGPT?
Yeah. I think I'm going to sort of go into 5 of them, but probably the one that sort of hits us almost all the time, sort of smack between the eyes, are the environmental failures. I mean, we just see them again and again. But I wanted to think of 2 slightly different and maybe not the sort of run-of-the-mill examples. And I want to sort of demonstrate some of this where it is apparent that we're not learning. So, and which is maybe where some of the OpenAI source data comes from. So in 1984, for example, in Butte, Montana, a large section of the Berkeley open pit wall collapsed, and that actually resulted in millions of cubic liters of acidic acid, you know, acidic metal-rich waters going into the surrounding areas. And although that did prompt significant improvements in regulations in management of toxic mining waste, 30 years later, in 2014, we had a dams failure at Mount Polley in British Columbia that again released millions of cubic meters of waste and tailings into the surrounding environment. So, you know, if I think of that, and I chose those as different examples from the ones that we always hear, because they might, we need to think a little bit more broadly. I then think of social failures, and some of those, I mean, we can just cast our minds back to, for example, the rapid expansion of gold mining in Ghana in the 1980s and 1990s. That was accompanied by forced evictions, property destruction, violence, etc. And, you know, if we cast our minds forward to 2021, police actually used tear gas and live ammunition at Kamoa-Kakula in the DRC to disperse protesters who were there demanding compensation for land, you know, that was taken over when a mine came in. So these things are there as well. You know, we don't have to cast our minds back to all that far to think about governance failures and the corruption charges against mining executives and companies in Africa. But again, that's now. But in 1999, for example, Mount Isa Mines was accused of bribery and corruption in their operations in Papua New Guinea. And actually, there were executives convicted in 2002 on those charges. So I'm painting this dreadful picture that we don't learn, but I'm hoping we'll get some opportunities to learn. One other one, supply chain failures. I mean, although the characters in the movie Blood Diamond were fictitious, the events depicted in the movie were based on real examples of conflict diamond mining and real lived experiences of individuals in Sierra Leone during that country's civil war. And, you know, the last one I wanted to mention was safety failures. And that is, and I'm going to use Western Australia as an example and cheat to say that the reason was because I could get the data quickly. So I didn't have to do too much looking around. But, you know, in the 1970s, there were 114 deaths related to mining. This reduced to 89 in the 80s and 23 by the time we got to the 2010s. But despite all of our progress, that statistic is at 5 already, and we're not halfway through the 2020s. And so if I think about all of those negative failures and how the media and a lot of the hype that we have drums them up and sort of focuses on those things because they're the headlines, you know, I'm not surprised with what we hear in terms of that, you know, apparent contradictory framework right at the beginning.
So I guess part of this is acknowledging those failures and owning them and saying what's the way forward. But is it all doom and gloom, or are there some areas of success as well that we can point our fingers at?
Totally. And this is where I think we can absolutely do better in what we do so that we don't all focus on the doom and gloom. You know, if I think about environmental successes, I can't think of one mining company that doesn't have a net zero target or at least emissions reductions, you know, not one. And you know, BHP, for example, said that they'll reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030 and then be net zero by 2050. You know, if I think of some of the social successes and really addressing social issues, I'm going to use a Western Australian example here, and that is the state inquiry into sexual harassment against women in the fly-in, fly-out mining industry that they conducted last year. Now, that was pretty confronting and sort of swept under the carpet for many years, but it resulted in such an amazing sort of ground surge of activity in that space. And there isn't a mining company in Australia, I reckon, that hasn't actually started implementing recommendations to just stamp it out. So I think that is an enormous success in terms of one of those social successes. An example of a governance success, I mean, most companies have demonstrated, you know, governance and transparency improvements. And I mean, this conference is another example of exactly that. But again, trying to find mining company examples, Anglo American implemented their new anti-corruption policy in 2020, simply called Choose to Do the Right Thing. And I just love the simplicity of that, because that is what is happening. And I think there are lots of examples out there. You know, going into supply chain successes, just this morning, I couldn't believe it. It was in my talk already, and then I found a new example, is Coppermark, which is an assurance framework for promoting the responsible sourcing and production of copper, announced that they surpassed 25% of global copper production goes through Coppermark. I mean, that is amazing considering that they only started in 2019. Another example in last week's Mining Weekly was an agreement between Circulor, which is a technology company, and SQM, a really big lithium company, where they are going to use technology, Circulor's technology, to ensure literally end-to-end lithium supply chain traceability from the mine, from lithium at SQM mines, all the way through to battery EV batteries. But what I found fascinating was that their ultimate aim is to be able to dynamically track scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions of all of their participants. And I mean, if I think about that in terms of some of the failures, I think that success is fantastic, and we should be really thinking about that. Last but not least, some of the safety successes, a lot of them are technological, but the new ones now are, and I like it because it's underground and open pit and sort of all in between, is the use of cameras and radio frequency ID technology that really just detects people, equipment, and does real-time alerts so that if there is any idea that there could be a condition like machines cut out, etc. And I just think that with that sort of technology, it's just going to get better.
I think this is really exciting, Vanessa, and you're quite right. These are stories that we don't hear. And we very rarely hear other sectors say, hey, I'm going to learn from mining, because look at all of this, these great aspects that they have brought to being. So final question, I guess, from me, which is, okay, so there's all this potential that's there. How do we actually build that trust within those ESG and beyond conversations within the raw material value chain?
I think for me, I found an article called Begin with Trust that was written by Frey and Morris in 2020. And they mention that trust has 3 drivers: authenticity, and we've heard almost all of it before, so I'll be very quick on this. It's basically authenticity, logic, which is basically, your reasoning is sound, and then empathy. I genuinely care about you and your success. But as we heard earlier, in terms of trust can be lost. And what they go on in their article to say is that breakdown in trust is usually when one of those trust drivers has a trust wobble. And they call it a trust wobble, which I just think is really, it's really good. But it can result from a very small change in behavior. And so once you have a trust wobble, the first way of being able to start building it is recognize which one had the wobble, and then try and balance it by really looking at 5 things essentially. And they said was reliability, was consistently doing what you say you're going to do. Competence, which is really demonstrating that deep understanding of the relevant subject matter. Just be honest all the time. Be authentic and own your mistakes if you make them, and really demonstrate that empathy to your stakeholders, that you hear them and that you are building your relationship on mutual respect and understanding. So, I've heard about showing commitment, I've heard about active listening, taking accountability, all of those things are how you build it. But, and I think it was James that said it, is transparency is king. Regularly communicate your data, regularly ask for areas of improvement, be open and honest about your ESG challenges and failures. But as we've heard, be open and honest about your successes as well, because the media does tend to hype on the negative. And my view is that there are all of these positive things going on, and that with all of these positive things going on, trust is a two-way street. So with that being a two-way street, we can, prove ChatGPT wrong. Let's all do that. Let's actually come up with that vision of trusted mining being possible, actually being that reality based on working together and finding solutions to these things.
Absolutely brilliant, Vanessa. So our goal here is to make sure that at some point in time in the future, when said AI is asked, what do you think of trusted mining? It comes back with a more positive answer.
This is happening.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much, Vanessa. It has been brilliant speaking to you. Everybody, round of applause for the fabulous Vanessa Lichfeldt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Vanessa. So we're now going to go from Western Australia to Finland, and I welcome to our virtual stage the fabulous Kimmo, who we tried to steal his thunder earlier on by bringing him in on the discussion. But Kimmo, I'm going to hand over to yourself for you to introduce yourself, your background, and give us a little bit of insight as to what this whole concept of trust, etc., means to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for the invitation to share my views in this nice webinar. So about my background, when we are discussing on trust, I think that I may be the right person to speak about that because I have always been suspected. What does it mean? It means that in my younghood, I was very active in NGOs. I was chairing some environmental organization, but at the same time, I had also some position within forestry and forest industries. So within environmentalists, I was suspected that, okay, he's working with NGOs, but anyway, he has his connections to industry. And within industries, I was always suspected that, okay, he understands industry and the economic side, but he has his links to Greenpeace and some other organizations. So I think that the first stage to building the trust is that try to understand different perspectives. And actually, that's what I have done in my later career, because 20 years I spent in politics, and that's like building trust 24 hours a day. I don't know what kind of view you have on politics. Can you trust on politics or not? But anyway, to be chosen in democracy, you must have some kind of trust within your constituency at least. Nowadays, I'm leading Geological Survey of Finland. I have been Director General 2 years now, and GTK, we was founded 140 years ago as a geological survey to map and to explore minerals for national purposes. But today, I would say that Geological Survey of Finland is very much internationally oriented geoscientific research institute. And now, touching to today's item, I would like to say a few words about this zero waste mining. Is it possible or impossible? And what do we mean by this? And why we need this kind of target for the public discussion. So we all know that energy disruption and digitalization increase hugely the amount of metals. And it offers big opportunities for mining sector, but at the same time, the lack of materials is threatening the value chains built after mining. Simultaneously, citizens' requirements toward mining and related industry are tightening all over the world. And the paradox is that the more we need metals to do the green transition, the higher environmental and social standards we must follow to be able to open the needed amount of new mines or circular economy plants to fulfill the needs. And as a response to this, some companies or research institutes has set this idea that, okay, we must move towards zero waste mining. I think that this concept must be opened a little more widely so that we don't cause disappointment within citizens. We must build trust. I would like to share some slides with you, if that's okay. And if I'm able to do that, let's see.
Just while Kimmo is sharing the slides, thank you so much for joining us here today and giving us insight into some of this research that GTK has been up to. Is really, really exciting. So we can see your slides. It looks perfect. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. Now there is the most difficult thing to know which arrow is forward and which is backward. Let's try if I can make it this time. No, I can't. It doesn't move at all. Oh. Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
Now you can see at least something. So today we have pressures for systemic changes in society, and we are all targeting to sustainable carbon neutral future. And it's also said in our strategy that GTK's task is to provide companies and societies with solutions to accelerate the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral future. So the situation is that we need something more and something less. And simply, we need more resources to do the carbon neutral future. We need more sustainable production of raw materials, both primary and secondary ones. We need traceability of minerals, and we need circular solutions. And what we need less is simply mining waste, negative impacts of mining, CO2 emissions, and material loss in design. I think this is very clear. Now I'm jumping to forest industry, just because I know that best about the industries, and just because I have some nice story to tell about this. So right now I'm living on an island of Lake Saimaa, the biggest lake in Finland. And in my childhood, there was a huge pressure towards forest industries. Forest industry is polluting our waters. You have to do something. And this figure shows the something they had done with last 30 years to purifying the processes and cutting all kind of emissions. And actually these figures are the total number of all industries. That means that the best one, we can really call them zero waste industries. Today, no one is worried about within my surroundings that forest industry is polluting our waters, because they have trust on the changes that companies have made. But at the same time, when there is news that some mineral exploration companies starting to work around the lake, from the next day you can see strong public opposition that no, we don't want to have any mining related activities here because they can't counter pollute our waters. So the comparison between these two branches of industries is so evident in my everyday life in that surroundings. But I believe that once this kind of development we can see in this figure is possible in some branch of industry, it's doable also in other branch of industry. And I do believe that we can do that part of zero waste mining, that we can purify the wastewaters and go to closed loops of waters and reduce almost all hazardous chemicals, chemical emissions. So that can be done. But the more problematic is that here you can see a nice picture about the circularity of materials processing. But the bad thing is that this is not the reality. The reality is like this. So we can say that mainly we are producing side rocks, and mainly we are producing tailings, and then we have some thin side flow of nickel and cobalt or something metal that we are really producing. So when we think about the amount of the volume of material, most of it at the moment is waste in mining sector, and this is something that is much more difficult to do, to just purifying the processes. So GTK has developed this kind of concept that once you are planning to open a mine, you can start to work to design out the amount of waste and optimize the content of waste. That starts from the beginning, that you have to very well know the content of the ore that you are going to use. And once you do that well beforehand, you can find different fractions that may be usable in some part of society, and which may be profitable to take out in the process. And at the same way, you can also think about the waste management and when you combine both of these, the result is that what now comes to waste, part of it can be converted to new products, and then the waste part, the biggest amount, it can be treated in a way that it's, let's say, almost harmless, less hazardous waste. And then the real hazardous fraction can be minimized, the volume of that. So that's a nice principle. But then what GTK, we have something unique. We are not just thinking theoretically of these issues. We are working with companies in our unique facilities, GTK Mintec. It's global research and innovation platform for mineral processing and circular economy. Right now we are building brand new laboratory building, and hopefully within a couple of years we can also increase the capacity of our pilot plant. And what we are doing there, we work from ore deposit to mine closure. The laboratories and pilot plant with all, you can have test runs with all scales, from hundreds of grams to tens of thousands of tons in that industrial pilot plant. And we are open to cooperate with, for example, technology providers, so that they can come to work with us to develop their technologies to improve the processing. Then we are doing this designing out mining waste, and we are building long-term waste testing facility, so that once you are doing the test runs in processing, you can get the real waste, and you can follow how it's doing and what kind of reactions you can see there even before you are opening the mine. So and then of course the water issues are coming more and more important while in mining and processing. And right now we are doing more and more things with secondary raw materials, from tailings to some industrial side flows. It's not just primary minerals we are working with. Okay, but this is something that we would like to develop, and we see that there will be growing demand for this kind of piloting facilities when Europe is trying to improve its own primary production and processing after Critical Raw Material Act. To summarize, our target is that we accelerate the transition to sustainable carbon neutral world, and we run a project in all key areas covering this mining and mineral production sector. We believe that we can take the needed steps forward only with good cooperation with private and public sector, with academia and companies. And then the green transition, it's so huge challenge for us that it calls for global solutions and global responsibility. And therefore, it was my pleasure to share some of these ideas today with you. Thank you so much.
Kimmo, thank you so much for giving this insight into what GTK is up to, but also as well the case study with regards to the forestry sector in Finland. I think that is absolutely fantastic. And actually, I guess the uplifting message to say, if the trust can be built with regards to, say, forestry, then there's no reason why we can't build that trust with regards to mining as well. So everybody, a massive round of applause for Kimmo. Absolutely fantastic. Kimmo, I've got a question from my end, and if people do have questions for Kimmo, please do feel free to put them into the chat or into the QA, or just raise your hand. So Kimmo, I'm really looking forward to it. So I'm coming to visit you in just over a month's time. So thank you so much for the invitation. And I've had lots of messages during the talk of everybody saying, "Oh, we're so jealous that that's where you're going." So this is an opportunity, I guess, for GDK to share some of the research that you're doing with a lot of individuals from across the circular economy and circularity population. I suspect that some of those individuals will not be geoscientists, will not be technical. So how do you go about sharing some things that are really, really technical with people who maybe don't have that foundation or that skill set of the scientific understanding? Do you have hints and tips with how do you share technical stuff with people who are not technical minded?
Oh, that's problematic. And I think that what I have learned in politics is that speak so simple language that you can understand it yourself. so that's the good hint. And I think that no matter if we are geologists or technical experts, we should be able to open the issues very simply when we are talking to persons who come from different perspective. And this circular economy issue, World Circular Economy Forum that you are going to participate, it has been arranged about 6 years now in Finland, in Japan, in Canada, in Africa, and now it's returning to Helsinki. And I think that it's really good step forward that mineral sector is involved first time really this year, because it's impossible to build circular economy worldwide without having mineral sector built in. And to be honest, you can recycle only issues that exist, but we are lacking huge amount of metals. The first generation in electrifying our societies and traffic and transportation and so on. So we must have huge amount of primary minerals available for these kind of green investments. But once we do that, we must keep in mind that most of these materials could be recycled later, so that we can build mineral sector as part of circular economy concept in future. And it's very fruitful, I wish, that mineral sector is discussing with other experts concerning circular economy and the economical models of that and so on and so on. So glad to have you in Finland.
I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fantastic. And so one final question, just building on that, Kimmo. So we're talking about that, I guess, the collaboration and the sharing sideways into other disciplines. But how about with regards to across Europe as well? So with regards to, say, the Critical Raw Materials Act and the real focus now on minerals and mining, but also GDK is one of the most respected institutions with regards to the research that you're doing. Are you seeing a lot of collaboration sideways across Europe with other similar organizations to say, okay, on a European basis, how do we deal with some of these problems that we have in the raw materials space? Are you seeing an increase in pool, or has there always been collaboration there?
I think that we have always been collaborating, but we need much more of that in future, and not only within EU, but also with our neighbors like UK and Norway and Switzerland and so on, and throughout the Western world, and also with our this EU proposal. It also covers partnership countries, and I think that GDK may have also a role in building that kind of trust with our partners and developing the mineral sector responsible way in some African and Asian countries as well. So we are very willing to cooperate within Europe and globally with our limited resources, of course, but we try to do our best.
Fantastic. So Kimmo, from all of us to you, thank you so much for coming and joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you in Finland. Thank you very much.
See you soon, Sarah. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kimmo. Great. So we're now going to go from a beautiful island and a lake in Finland. I don't know if that's where you're sitting today, Kimmo, but that's what's in my imagination. Across to Amanda, who I suspect is not sitting on a beautiful island in a lake. You might be sitting somewhere in London type direction.
I'm absolutely sitting somewhere in London. And I was a little bit jealous when you were talking about your lovely lake.
You can join, Amanda. You can join us.
There we go. You've got yourself an invitation, Amanda. Fantastic. So on you go, Amanda. Sorry.
Up to you.
Okay, so I just wanted to formally welcome Amanda to the stage. Amanda, if you have slides, if you want to start sharing them now. Amanda van Dijk is no stranger to responsible raw materials. Amanda has given us a talk on a number of occasions because she is one of those investors who actually lives what she says. And so the fund that Amanda runs really does use ESG and sustainability as a core part of making those investment decisions, and then also working with those exploration development companies, etc., to make sure that where they are exploring or developing raw materials projects, they do so keeping ESG really very much at the forefront. From a personal perspective, I've had the true delight of working with Amanda and her team across a number of different projects. And what's really exciting to see is that where a project may not be perfect, because to be honest, no project is perfect when you start, the dedication that Amanda and her team have shown to really help those projects improve and put the right things in place and acknowledge the fact that it costs money to be responsible. So therefore, the short-term return that an investor might expect to see actually with regards to ESG looks slightly different because it involves different aspects of value, not just the financial aspects. Now, Amanda, we can share slides this end.
Sorry, I was trying to share my slides and I'm encountering technical difficulties.
That's quite all right.
If you wouldn't mind, that would be great. I'll just sort of set up the preamble slightly. We are investors in the space, and we believe in sustainable investing, which is a process. It's not, there's no checkbox. This is a sustainable investment, this isn't, and do X, Y, Z. Making projects sustainable is an ever-evolving process. And part of what we do is try to constantly work, and it involves working with all of the other stakeholders that are in the world of mining, as it were, and understanding all of the things that make mining work and going from there. My background and part of how we make our decisions is understanding which commodities we need to invest in. What are the commodities? A big part of our decision making before we even get to making the decision on which actual investments are the most sustainable or that we can make the most sustainable is understanding which commodities we should go into. So that's sort of the basis of this. And I come from the finance side, which is, you know, how we balance understanding in the sector. So I will jump to the third slide if possible and talk about demand and supply, and why do we care about critical minerals? Why is everyone talking about critical minerals right now? And the reason for it is that the train that we're on as a society, as a world, and I think just about everybody has acknowledged it, although people are on different paths to getting to a net zero transition, it's going to require a lot more metals. There is no scenario in which we get to a lower temperature in the world that doesn't involve electrification and significantly more metals is required. EVs are the ones everyone talks about because it's the easiest, and we will need about 2.5 times more metal for every car that we produce that's an EV versus an internal combustion engine based on present technology. But the much larger demand on metals that's going to drive demand going forward is actually from renewable power and infrastructure. As we slowly but surely, and it is it's a transition, decommission the coal plants and recommission all of the myriad ways in which we are going to find cleaner energy and lower carbon energy. All of those lower carbon energy forms that we have right now that we know of, the wind, the solar, the nuclear, even the hydroelectric, and all of the interconnected grid that all of that electricity runs on, that is all very metal intensive, significantly more metal intensive than a coal-fired power plant, unfortunately. And then you come to the sort of thing that's happening in the background. Everyone's talking about the energy transition, but there are demographic trends in the world that are actually much stronger than the energy transition. And that's global urbanization. The UN and just about every other body in the world, there's been a marked trend that started in about 1980, when about 80% of the world still lived in a rural environment, to by about 2050, they think a solid 80% of the world is going to live in an urban environment. And people who live in urban environments, whether that urban environment is Guangzhou or Kansas or Kinshasa, those urban dwellers tend to consume per capita between 2 and 3 times more commodities per person than a rural dweller. So behind all of this global energy transition, we have a transition where the people and their consumption patterns and their development patterns are driving considerably more demand for commodities across the board. So the question is, how are we going to meet that demand? And that is the subject of what I'm speaking about. Next slide, please. How much the energy transition, which is the primary reason that everybody's thinking about, one of the things they say is like it's very, very metal intensive. But according to Tesla, and I have to admit, we have to attribute the information and then people get to argue with it. But according to Tesla, the fossil fueled economy is actually incredibly inefficient. And once it's built, arguably the sustainable electricity generation from all the ways it comes from is a great deal more efficient. So that energy transition is going to be significantly more efficient. But before we can get to that energy transition, we need to build all the infrastructure. And what fossil fuels have on the rest of the world, as it were, is that all of their infrastructure is built. We have all the coal-powered stations. We have all of the gas-powered stations. We have all of the gas infrastructure in place. The world knows how to use fossil fuels, and they might be using them reasonably inefficiently, but there are trillions of dollars in already built fossil fuel infrastructure out there. And in order to get to this lower carbon and arguably much more efficient form of and sustainable form of energy, we're going to have to build trillions more dollars in infrastructure for the renewable power economy. And that is why it's going to take time, and it's going to be a slow process. And we need to figure out the most efficient, even within this already more efficient methodology, we need to figure out the most energy efficient methodology. Next, please. And part of that is figuring out which technologies are going to be used and what we need to do. These clean technologies, which are largely renewable power, EVs, all of that sort of thing, they use different metals than the fossil fuel economy used. An internal combustion engine uses a different suite of metals. Not only do we use more metal, but we use different metals. And part of that is we don't just need to build all of this new infrastructure for a clean energy electrified economy. We also need to use different metals that we used before, and we need to process them into different materials than we used before. And that is part of the structural change that is taking time. We don't just need more mines, we need different types of mines, we need different types of refineries, and that sort of thing, to be formed into different types of materials that make a solar panel, that make like the batteries, the huge batteries that go in windmills and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. And the big question out there, the huge question out there is how much? How much more do we need and what do we need? And I'm going to preface this with the calculation of what we need is debated, that we need significantly more, between 2 and 4 times or 5 times more metal to be mined today than we've mined in different times, is absolute. But which metals are we going to need in which quantity? Right now, to meet the Paris Agreement goals, and by 2050, based on present technology, this is the sort of accepted estimate of how much more we're going to have to mine per annum. 5 times more lithium, almost 5 times more cobalt, 4 times more graphite, and then a host of other things that we never mined in serious quantities before. Indium. I'm not sure a lot of people know what indium is. And significantly more copper per annum. But as we go, and that means that we need 11 times more of the largest lithium mine in the world to be built for that annual production. 15 times more of what is now the largest cobalt producer in the world to be built. 26 times more of the largest graphite mine in the world. That's hard to contemplate. And then if we go to the next slide, please. These are estimates. And because of these estimates, because everybody's arguing about which technologies are going to be dominant, how fast realistically can this energy transition happen? The goals of the Paris Agreement are great, but the difficult steps to getting there, the finance that we'll talk about more, the financing and the amount of society that needs to come together, that's led to significantly different forecasts for how much we need. And these are all of, I put in front of you, there's a 4 times split. So between around, and this is about the most commonly understood energy transition metal is lithium, and lithium carbonate is the most common product of the mines. The variation that we're going to need just by 2026 is 300 to 1200. That's a 4 orders of magnitude difference by incredibly intelligent and well-respected commodity forecasting groups. That's a huge difference, and that's based on the differing views on how strong our economic growth is going to be able to support the energy transition. What technologies are going to be out there for us to use? How supportive will government policies be of the energy transition? Will production be able to keep pace? Some people think that we simply won't grow because we won't be able to find and develop enough mines in time. Will recycling play a larger role than it plays at present, which at least in the lithium-ion battery metals supply chain is very, very little at this point in time globally. Will the prices just get too high? Is the cost benefit analysis, will we keep consuming and keep electrifying at the pace we're electrifying today if the lithium price is 5 times higher? Because that's the demand and supply. These are the kind of questions that we're asking that's led to such a huge variation in what demand is going to be going forward. My personal opinion, and I need to make sure it's my personal opinion here, is that we will transition, and we will get reasonably close to the Paris Agreement goals. But the path that we're going to take to get there and the pace at which we're going to get there is not going to be something we can forecast accurately, because there's too many players. Much like mining, there are just too many factors at play to be able to, even with ChatGPT and quantum computers, the human element is different. And there's so many factors that affect demand, including supply, like can we supply it, that we're going to have to roll with the punches to some extent. As we get on, we're all getting on the train to energy transition, but the route that the train's going on is a little bit different. So next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, I'm just saying, we are going to energy transition, and there are huge challenges to that energy transition from every level of society. The fact that it's going to happen is absolute, but from the very beginning, there's been a very, and it goes to the theme of this entire conference. If we're going to energy transition, we're energy transition because we want a cleaner, more sustainable planet and a more sustainable future for the human race. But getting there has to be sustainable. We do not want these metals, and we do not want renewable power at any cost. And at least in the West, society has been very clear about that. We want to energy transition, and we want to do it sustainably. And while I think that there are huge numbers of tools available, there has been a breakdown in trust between society in the past and the mining sector. And if we're going to provide the metals, we're going to need to get society as a whole to trust that we can get them those metals in a sustainable fashion. And that is why the route to the energy transition is going to be meandering, and we're going to have to build trust with society as a whole and prove to them that this sustainable transition can happen in a way that's balanced for everyone. So next slide, please. And these are the challenges out there. Right now, geopolitics cannot be ignored. Sorry, I'm going a little bit over time, I'm realizing. So I'm gonna have to go quite quickly now. And I will, geopolitics is a huge element that is pushing down supply of metals. We are in a bit of a supply chain. The supply chain right now is largely Chinese, because the Chinese, credit where credit is due, saw the need for an energy transition earlier than we did and secured global supply before most people in the West realized that critical metals and a supply chain of critical metals was going to be required for the energy transition. Right now, the rest of the world is playing catch up. They've realized we need the critical metals, but they haven't secured the supply, nor have they built the infrastructure for developing that supply. Part of the challenge to building that infrastructure, to build those mines and securing the supply, is getting enough money to do it. You know, Tesla, as one of the people who forecast demand, thinks we need over 400 billion to be invested by the end of this decade in new mine supply to be able to meet that demand. And that's just by 2030. 400 billion is a lot of money in just the mining side. They think there's another 200 billion that's required in mining processing. And that's a lot of money in a capital constrained industry. And it's harder to get that financing when commodity prices are incredibly volatile. The lithium carbonate price went up 1,300% in 2022 and is down 65% this year. It's very hard to finance a mine when and get the hundreds of millions of dollars you need to finance a mine when nobody knows what the returns are going to be on that mine. In addition, and I prefaced this very carefully earlier for a reason, we need to be very careful about making forecasts about how much metal we need for technology, because technology is advancing rapidly in our space. Part of being able to harness renewable power effectively, sustainably, and efficiently is building grid scale batteries. Right now, we're using lithium ion batteries, which are not particularly efficient at all for grid scale storage. And there's a bit of a war out there to figure out what will be the effective grid scale storage. A lot of people think there'll be sodium batteries, which are some of the cleanest batteries in the world, or will they be vanadium redox? Will the internal combustion, will lithium ion batteries tomorrow look like the lithium batteries of today? I don't know. So people are trying to make forecasts based on an unknown technology future. At the same time, the mining industry is trying to decarbonize the supply chain and ensure that we have full supply chain transparency, because that is what civil society is demanding of us. And I think that in order to achieve all of this, in order to get enough metal to get through the energy transition, we all need that supply chain transparency is going to be the biggest and most important factor in making the energy transition work and being able to source all of those critical metals, because we're going to need to have an understanding, like Kitla was saying earlier, of what it's going to take, an understanding of how we're going to get there, and an understanding that we can do this sustainably, because that's going to be what it takes. We're all going to have to work together. There is no way we can get there and meet all of these significant challenges without all of civil society, technology, miners, and global governments and legislation coming together to enable the transition, because it's too big a challenge to do without considerably more dialogue and trust between all parties. And I think I've gone a little bit over time, so I'm going to stop there. And if there's any quick questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Amanda, as always, really, really, really fantastic. Not only as a summary, but also to see your insight and I guess your interpretation as well of what's going on here. Not saying that it's different to what other people are saying, but just the way that you put it is fantastic. And I think allows us to kind of get inside the brain of someone who is there going, well, how do we invest in these areas and how do we propel all these aspects forward? So round of applause, everybody, for the fabulous Amanda. Absolutely brilliant. Amanda, I've got one question my end. If anybody does have questions, pop them into the chat or the Q&A, etc., and we'll feed them through to Amanda. So Amanda, your slides are fantastic, and as well looking at the different types of batteries, etc. Recently, I've been engaged in conversation with a lot of the hydrogen fuel cell providers and developers. What are your thoughts with regards to the fuel cells? Because of course they make use of a slightly different array of materials, such as the platinum group metals, which perhaps we're more used to because we've been mining them for ages for catalytic converters. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts with regards to that aspect.
So one of the reasons for the huge variation in the forecasts for demand is that nobody really understands what the future technologies are going to become dominant. It's going back to my childhood, VHS versus Betamax, which I don't think anyone understands anymore. We don't know which technologies. I think we need to be very careful with hydrogen fuel cells because there's a perception in the world that hydrogen is a like-for-like clean replacement for natural gas, and that we could run everything on hydrogen. Hydrogen fuel cells for large-scale transport, at least, lithium-ion batteries don't really work well once you get above the size of like a van. And they're not particularly efficient, and they don't last long enough for industrial use. And trucking is a huge global business. I personally believe that hydrogen fuel cells are going to, in large scale transport, hydrogen fuel cells are the long-term solution. But in terms of, there are serious challenges to like for like. Hydrogen is not the solution for everything. Right now, we need all of the renewable power we can get to just plug it into the grid, and using the renewable power we have to create hydrogen is actually quite inefficient. Part of what we discussed earlier was efficiency in energy technologies, and burning, frankly, clean electricity to make another form of fuel is not particularly efficient. I think hydrogen becomes useful when we have a great deal more clean energy and maybe spare clean energy. and it'll also have different applications. I think that the energy demand, the metals demand mix to support these technologies is going to evolve. Those forecasts that I put in front of you are not going to be the same in 5 years or 10 years. They're going to be different based on things like more hydrogen fuel cells, especially in the large transport sector. But we need to base it on something, so we make all of our assumptions based on present technology. I think hydrogen fuel cells, like many things, will play a role, but my personal opinion is that the battery mix and the metals used in the energy transition for power generation and the technologies used, it's not going to be a dominant technology. It's not going to be hydrogen fuel cells or hydrogen is the solution. It's going to be a huge number. The solution is actually more complex rather than it is simple, and it's going to evolve over time.
Awesome. No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Amanda. We can open up the most glorious discussion with regards to all of this, because as well, depending on how macro we look, it's almost like, okay, so what's the energy footprint of producing hydrogen versus the energy footprint of producing the raw, it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? And it becomes really interesting. So Amanda, thank you so much. As always, round of applause. Brilliant. And that then takes us to our final speaker for this morning's session, who is our phenomenal Gijsbert, who's dialing in from Brussels. Gijsbert, I don't know if you have slides that you want to share, or if you're just speaking to us. That's fantastic. If you've got slides, now's a good time to click those buttons. Gijsbert, actually knows a number of us very well, working on a variety of different projects, ostensibly around change. But what Gijsbert's going to do is to roll everything that we've been hearing together by talking about, as we can see on the screen in front of us, the cultural dimensions of trust. So with that, a round of applause for the fantastic Gijsbert. Thank you very much. Oh, and for some reason, Gijsbert, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can indeed. Fabulous.
That's a very important part I want to talk about. Trust is rooted in reliability. I don't trust my Jabra speaker because it's not reliable, clearly. So first of all, thank you very much, Sarah, for your wonderful introduction and for the opportunity to speak here. Trust in mineral value chains, and I think in general, I think is a very pertinent topic, and we find ourselves in an enormous or tremendous transition along social, environmental, economical, and geopolitical dimensions in the energy transition. But there's many more aspects of this. We think about metals and about energy, and actually this is a kind of a top layer of substance, which is of course very valid. But in the end, we are groups of people who base our decisions and going through this transformation, base our decisions on emotions and on trust. So I think there it's very important topic to talk about. And this transition it's a global challenge, and understanding trust, perception, and decision making in a multicultural or international context, I think is useful. So this is what I would like to talk about today, and hopefully also discuss with you. I'd look at some of the internet or multicultural dimensions of this, and I'll come to this a bit later. So perhaps some background to myself. I'm by training, I'm an engineer in mining and metals, or mineral processing and recycling specifically. And over the past 15 plus years, I've been working in in a variety of companies and countries. Always looking at building new teams, new organizations, departments, and also transforming existing ones. So this was always about finding a combination between technical content and articulating ideas and getting people on board and making it a common goal and to make a step forward and also make this change last. So about a year ago, I created Plutonic Raw Materials Advisory, which is a boutique advisory firm focusing on supporting organizations to make the energy transition. And sometimes this has very technical aspects, as in minerals and metals, etc., or energy, and sometimes, and at the same time, this also has a lot of other dimensions. There might be financial, regulatory risk, of course, as where Satara is very active, and also other things that relate to how do we communicate and how do we create a common basis to provide an emotional basis for making better decisions. And these decisions have then rational drivers, but the foundation is emotional, based in trust and communication. So these are the areas I work in. Now, if you think about trust and what trust means, and I enjoyed listening over the past days and also today to several of the speakers. If you look at what trust, or not look, but listen rather, or feel what trust means to yourself. If you think about trust or trustworthy experience with somebody or with yourself, and you listen to your body or feel your body, you feel that, you know, distrust brings a kind of a closing emotion, and you shield and you do this kind of fight, flight, freeze type of reaction. While trust is a much warmer emotion that opens up and brings clarity, and also brings creativity. And this is something we need during a transition, because if you make decisions based on when you're afraid, it's like going to the supermarket when you're hungry. You make short-term decisions which are usually not the best ones in the long term. So I think it's a very, very critical mineral, so to say, to talk about trust and to include a much more opening and positive element in our transition. Now, trust is rooted in a very in a part of the brain, essentially, where we don't really form words. Even though I did make an effort to put some words there, some of the previous speakers also mentioned some of these. For example, integrity, competence, and benevolence, that the other party has a positive intent with where you want to go. We also need to communicate these things, have shared values, common goals, and you might need to negotiate and develop this. And last but not least, trust is also rooted in predictability. Now, we need to be careful here that this also is often linked or misconstrued as likability. So often it's the case that if you trust somebody, you also like this person, but likability does not mean trustworthiness. So trustworthiness is rooted in predictability, which is rooted in competence and diligence. So can this person or thing, as with my Jabra speaker, actually do the job when you want it, and is there some clarity in there that you can rely on this process or person? So these are a couple of important things to keep in mind. And also what a couple of other speakers referred to is how then these are, elements of trust. That's all fine and useful, but we also need to do something. We need to process this internally. We need to process this through our internal emotional basis or lens, if you will. And this is where perception comes in. Trust and perception are also two important linked concepts that we need for better decision making. Now, perception is written here a couple of perspectives on what perception can mean. It refers to how we interpret and make sense of the information that we see or perceive. This relates to what Vanessa mentioned earlier during her talk. She talked about belief and confidence in reality and reliability. She called it logic. So this is sense. Does it make sense? Can we do something concrete with what we see? We also see everything around us through a lens. It's filtered, right? It's filtered through past experiences, through beliefs, through cultural background. I think the first presentation by Alison, she talked about authenticity and taking into account trauma, and particularly in stakeholder management and interaction, and for example, in permitting of plants and mines and other changes. This is very important. And these are key drivers in decision making. Now, these are all generic concepts, and I think are useful to understand. But what can we do, practically with this? What can you do, and what can I do when you land in a say a multicultural project? And sometimes a multicultural project can also mean other types of differences. So not necessarily different countries, but also can be the north or the south of a country, or genders, or different generations of people. So these are useful. So I'll share just some useful tools that I found helpful to better understand and deal with these differences, and preferably also leverage them and have a good laugh about it. I hope, they might be a bit small, but I hope you can see these are just two frameworks that you can use to visualize and understand, and preferably also have some fun with it. These cultural differences. On the left, you see a framework called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, who has a fantastic book, by the way, that I recommend, and also some really good YouTube videos. So do look that up, where she defines cultural differences along 7 dimensions. So you have here how you communicate. Is that low context, high context? Do you explain everything? So, for example, American versus Japanese. And as a Dutch person, there's also very big differences here. As you can see here in orange on the left, there's Dutch, and a lot of others are on the right. So you need to watch out for big differences, right? And as Sarah mentioned, I also work in some projects with Setarla, also on change. So there you can see these things directly. I'm a Dutch national. I lived abroad for many years now, but still some of my cultural and emotional base is in the Dutch culture. And when working with some of my British and Irish colleagues, you talk about, for example, when you say something like, oh, that's very interesting. Perhaps you can also, so the Dutch person thinks, great, that thing was interesting, that was all good. We focus on that main point. And the British person might have actually meant the thing, oh, but also look at X, Y, Z. So these type of tools helps you visualize what different people mean, how you can engage with different people, and how you can create a kind of an open channel of trust, and also have some fun with it, I think. On the right-hand side, you see another framework by Geert Hofstede. It's called Country Comparison, where he maps out differences between countries along these dimensions that you see here. For example, power distance, it is hierarchy, conflict avoidance, or uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, which does not necessarily mean facial hair or deepness of voice, but how you make decisions do you do that in a consensual way as a group, or do you do it in a different way? There's big differences, and of course these are all kind of generalizations, and you also need to look at your own specific personal differences. But these are some very helpful tools to kind of address the elephant in the room that a lot of people might not even know is there, and that you can take into account and work under different conditions. One practical example is I was working with a French colleague and talking about different ideas, new ideas, and the Dutch are very much focused on trying out new ideas fast and failing fast type of approach, while the French came across to me as a Dutch person as a very negative. It was always like, that doesn't work, and this is a problem, and that's stupid. And well, he didn't use those words, but it was a very negative tone, because in general, of course, this is a generalization as well, French people provide value to a group by pointing out the dangers. So imagine you're walking through a forest, a Dutch person will happily run around and collect mushrooms, probably, or something, some other kind of thing. And the French person might point out, like, be careful, there's a bear, be careful, there's a dangerous tree, or whatever. So if you can, these type of tools will help you place this in a very practical and often also funny context, so that you can understand each other and place this and not react to this negativity that, this French person is always so negative, but say, okay, maybe this has a point, and maybe I need to identify that as a risk and do something with it. So then you can move from more, say, closed judgmental environment to a more open, creative and positive environment. So I hope these are a couple of things that I've hit my head a couple of times in different contexts, and I hope that these tools can be useful for others as well. In light of time, I'll just leave it at that. These are some of my contact informations, and I would be very happy if you contact me to talk about these things or other challenges that you might be facing. And happy to always have an or preferably personal coffee.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gijsbert. Round of applause, everybody. I'm in the middle of laughing. I think this is going to go on for a while. This picture of the Dutch all running around picking mushrooms and the French saying, no, watch out for the bear. Yeah. Watch out for the bear. I think this is just beautiful. So is this something, Gijsbert, where so obviously in that particular situation, and we're saying this with much love and respect, by the way, in case anybody is listening to this out of context, in that situation, actually the Dutch person and the French person working together are much stronger because they've got different strengths, but there actually may be some tension between the two of them, because the Dutch person is probably looking at the French person saying, you lazy person, why aren't you picking mushrooms? And the French person's looking at the Dutch person saying, you're a total idiot, there's a bear standing over there. So is there something here in terms of there's initial tension, but actually by working together there's strength?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think there is, I think maybe an overall conserved amount of energy, and you can choose where you put this. So you can put this on conflict, on judging each other, on saying, well, no, there's a bear there, and the Dutch person might be picking mushrooms. Although arguably you might want to eat some mushrooms before a bear eats you, but that's another thing that you had some experience with polar bears, I think. But apart from that, I think frameworks of looking at these type of interactions in a less personal way gives you an opportunity to take this energy that's in a kind of a short-term reaction you would use in a negative way, like by judging somebody or by being angry or upset or whatever. You can move this to a more constructive thing, like by building trust and by using this energy in a positive way, by actually leveraging these different perspectives you see from different in a situation. So if there is anything like an overall, like a total truth, or however you want to call this, maybe this exists, maybe it doesn't, but in any case, we all have different perspectives of this same blob of thing we're dealing with, right? So these kind of tools, I think, can be helpful to support each other and to go to a more holistic approach of the situation.
No, I very much agree. And I think all of us were there taking down the notes of the different tools that you'd use there. I don't know, Vanessa, maybe if we can bring you into the conversation, because as Vanessa let us or be aware of, so Vanessa's currently sitting in Western Australia. But we can probably tell from Vanessa's accents, Australia is not where Vanessa necessarily grew up. Vanessa, in terms of the tool that Gijsbert had on the left-hand side of his slide, so well, actually on the right as well, comparing, I guess, the characteristics at a very general level of different countries, different nations. Have you ever used any of these tools before, or have you been seeing them used either be it for good purposes or also for bad purposes? I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, it's a really good one, and the one that you had on the left, I think, Erin, I couldn't get her surname, but I've seen a similar one just in terms of the trust scale, and when you start looking at a sort of very generalistic view of where people trust initially. So very much, I think you had 7 different elements. I've seen one that just looks at trust, where in their communication style, and I'll say that I'm a South African not by birth, but by where I grew up. And I'll say that that's sort of in the middle. But when I first got to Australia, for example, I was told I was very direct. I'm like, don't understand that. And then now that I've been in Australia for sort of 5 or 10 years, it's like, I don't know where that sort of comes from, because, you know, maybe it's not quite what you see is what you get. So I do think the tools that you have and those that you suggest we look at very much play into that sort of initial, am I listening? How do I listen? Where does that person come from in terms of, you know, the active listening is easy, but that reflective listening, I think, is important too, to just say, well, maybe somebody from Japan isn't quite going to get exactly what I say if I say it like that, versus somebody from the US, you know, and I think it's very important that we take that into account. So maybe not exactly those tools, but definitely ones similar, and I think they're very, very helpful.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Vanessa. Gijsbert, do you have anything in response? And then I'll bring in Amanda to the conversation.
Yeah, I think you're right, Vanessa. And one, I think, interesting thing you pointed at also, you know, as a sort of South African in Australia, that a lot of people or a lot of cultures think of themselves as very direct, or where that might actually not be the case, or it's not so simple. For example, the Dutch tend to be quite direct, or be perceived as direct, confrontational, as a former British colleague of mine called it. Very confrontational until there is a confrontation. He found it very interesting in boardroom discussions that there was, you know, Dutch and British in the same room, and the Dutch were very abrasive and confrontational until, you know, the Brit finally gets up and, okay, now we fight, and the Dutch were gone. So you know, it's very much that aspect of understanding, and there's just a couple of dimensions that you can use, but there's, of course, it's a much broader picture. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, isn't it, Gijsbert? Because I think that it's a blind spot for many of us when we don't quite realise that we might be being perceived in a very different way to how we're perceived, perhaps at home or by our families or whatever. Amanda, do you want to come in on this? And I don't know if it's got anything to do with your surname.
Italians and Dutch are two absolutely different sides of the cultural spectrum. And as I learned in business school, it's like being a schizophrenic. But what I would say is that this is actually a lot more important, I think, for the mining industry than most people realize. Mining is genuinely one of the most global industries on the planet. And you guys used to do you probably still do a great map of all of the different stakeholders involved in mining, which, you know, civil societies at one side, and the understanding of meaning. I mean, we look at mines where what an Australian mining CEO and team says to a local community or a national government, and they're all speaking the same language, they're all speaking English, but what they all mean and what they all want and the context of what they want are all over the map, where you've got, you know, even a South African engineer or metallurgist consultant telling them, well, these are these things, but because they didn't knock the Australian on the head, he didn't understand it was important. Right? I actually think understanding cultural context is something that everyone in our industry should be getting a bit of a training on, because there's so much miscommunication, because context and background is not considered when different, in this incredibly global industry that brings in so many stakeholders, and how much gets missed and how many projects get stopped and delayed because people speaking the same language simply didn't understand each other.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think with that, Amanda, we've probably all got stories that we can share. I'm going to bring in Kimo in a second with regards to this. I worked on a project in West Africa, and it was a 50-50 joint venture, which is always dangerous, between a very large French company and an Australian company.
Oh, God.
Now, the Australians didn't speak really any French, and the French didn't want to speak any English. And that was just on a normal language basis before we got anywhere near differences with regards to culture. And then also as well, the culture of the environment in which that particular joint venture was operating, which was totally different to France and Australia as well. So there was so much that was being lost in translation because of the different backgrounds of those individuals. But coming back, maybe, Kimmo, to your to bring you into the conversation, I'm still laughing at the Dutch picking mushrooms and the French pointing at the bears, but also as well the time it often takes to build that trust and that understanding between different groups. Now, I realize that Sweden is very different to Finland, but Rose and I were in Sweden probably about 6-9 months ago, I guess, Rose, and we were there for 3 days, having worked with very large Swedish mining company, and we've been working with them probably for about 6-9 months. So we knew them, you know, in a British context, you would know those people pretty well, even though it was all over Teams and Zoom. When we got to Sweden, it probably took us about 2.5 days, didn't it, Rose, for actually us to build that trust, or for them to trust enough in Rose and myself. As soon as we went past that tipping point of feeling comfortable with one another, I've never received so much oversharing with regards to the communication and what those individuals felt with us. So suddenly we went from being external strangers, and I don't know what the tipping point was. It just happened like the snap of 2 fingers. Suddenly we were best friends, and being told about deep and personal secrets that from a British perspective, you would never share that with somebody else unless they were very, very close to you. So it was really interesting for Rose and myself, that sort of cultural differentiation. So that's my very ineloquent segue, Kimmo, across to yourself. In Finland, where again, we've got very different cultural norms, and actually being able to work together can be really fascinating, saying, okay, well, what am I actually trying to say? And where am I inadvertently coming across as something slightly different? I don't know what you think.
Well, thank you. So I was relieved when I didn't find Finland in Gisbert's analysis, because I was wondering what kind of results we would like to we would see. But I can't blame any of you if you don't understand Finns, because we can't understand ourselves, even ourselves. So I think that's good starting point for international cooperation, because we can't accept that someone should understand us, so we try to understand others. And that's, I guess, the way how we have survived in the world, living next to Russia as a part of the Western world. But to be honest, I think that what I heard about you talking about the differences, I think that I have heard a little bit similar stories, because TTK has had cooperation with experts from so many countries that there is some kind of silent knowledge that how is it to work and cooperate with French and British and German and so on and so on. But I think that this is something that it's nice to realize and nice to recognize and even nice to chat with. But anyhow, I return to my last sentences. The global challenges are so huge that we just need to realize that we are human beings and we need to work together to find the solutions that are needed. Anyway, I repeat that we are looking for cooperation, and we are just trying to share our experiences, our expertise. But it's really valuable that you can also learn to know each other as human persons. And I think that Finns are quite easy to cooperate. Usually we are quite straight and honest, even so honest that you can think that we are stupid. But that's good basic to build trust forward. And we may give idea that we are a little bit remote. During COVID, we were joking that it's so difficult for Finns to keep this 2.5 meter distance, because we are used to keep 5 meters distance. So, but once you get to know us, I think that you can find a little bit similar kind of things what Sarah thought about Swedes, that then we are very open, and we may tell things that you don't expect to take place. Let's see. Okay, this was opening from Finnish person.
That's fantastic, Kimmo. Thank you. This is actually beginning to turn into a cultural understanding, and I think exactly as Olusola has said in the chat, mining being global is made up of so many diverse traditions, cultures, and yes, I totally agree with you, Olusola, that actually we should be able to accommodate them. But actually, maybe it's the fact that we are so diverse. And actually, if we can be able to sort of crack that nut on, okay, how do we actually really listen to one another and then work together? That's the kind of innovation that we need and creativity that we need to be able to address some of these challenges that we've got. So I think it's really exciting, and us being able to laugh together is brilliant. So Vanessa, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, it really reminds me, and we smile about this, but two other elements to trust that we haven't really spoken about. And one is it needs to be replenished. It's almost like a friendship thing. You can't just build it and assume that it's just going to last. It actually needs maintenance in between. And that's why when I spoke about it, it's a two-way street. Excuse me. So it was that sort of replenishment and nurturing as well. So it's not just there and it's going to stay there. It takes some work. But the other thing that I really was enjoying when we were talking about the cultural differences and you know, maybe the oversharing and all of that comes with different cultures is part of trust is also actually allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And if we do allow ourselves to be vulnerable, that sort of comes in with the bit of, you know, be yourself, be empathetic, be all of these things. But if you allow yourself to say, look, I don't know all of the answers. I actually don't know everything here, and I'm really at a bit of a loss here. So help me, kind of thing. I do think that that's an element of trust that sort of goes towards being able to build it and replenish it like a relationship.
And I guess with that, Vanessa, so in terms of, so if you're trying to build a solution or a way forward or something, if somebody is saying, no, but I'm the world leader on this, that's actually quite a difficult starting point, because it then means you have to go, yes, you got absolutely fantastic with regards to this. Just looking at some other areas where you could carry on being the world leader, or, those kind of things. And I say that as well because earlier on today, I was on a webinar, which was basically entitled Australia is the world's leader with regards to ESG. What do we think?
What do we think? I love that question.
Well, I think it was a case of, Australia is the world leader with regards to ESG differences between Northern and Southern Hemisphere. So I was brought in as somebody from the Northern Hemisphere to comment with regards to this. Now, that was really interesting because I think that Australia has lots and lots of strengths, but there are perhaps some areas of ESG where Australia, and again, being very general, isn't necessarily as strong as a nation they might like to think themselves to be. Now, being British, how do I say that? I don't turn around and say, Australia, you're talking a load of utter rubbish, blah, blah, blah. No, my natural inclination would be to say, how do I say this really politely?
Interesting.
Exactly. So this is, so, that's very interesting. So a British person saying, that's really interesting is code for saying, I don't really agree with you. And it gets even worse if we say, that's really interesting, building on that, which is code for saying, I didn't agree with you in the first place, and now I'm going to tell you the right answer. But it doesn't help that being British, and so therefore, yes, that the only language that I can really speak is English. Being British, we use the English language in such a difficult way because we don't actually say what we mean. We're not being straight. So I think, Vanessa, I totally agree with you. And it was a case of saying, well, how do you, if somebody's not willing to be vulnerable, or culturally it's quite difficult to be vulnerable, then actually it becomes more difficult to then build on that aspect of trust. Is that an interpretation of what you're saying?
I think you're absolutely right, because not everybody has that as a cultural background. So bringing the discussion sort of, I don't want to say full circle, but having all elements of that discussion, I think that's what we do. And it's navigating all of those elements together that we need to be better at, so that we get the right communication and we communicate that trust in a better way.
Fantastic. So with that, I'm going to bring in Ludovine now to the discussion. So Gijsbert, as you know, Ludovine is maybe more of the French persuasion. So in this room, we're great. We've got the mushroom pickers and we have the bear spotters. Ludovine, before I then go around the panel and just ask everybody to maybe just finish on a final thought with regards to, was there something from today's or this first session today where you thought, I'm going to remember that's really useful, or something that you really didn't agree with? So we'll go to that in a second. But firstly, I'm going to ask for Ludovine's perspective with regards to this conversation around culture, and perhaps Ludovine as well, the fact that you've spent a huge amount of time in West Africa. So maybe seeing some of those cultural differences as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. It was an enlightening morning. I have to say what strikes me is that a lot of the stakeholders we're used to dealing with, we engage with them, whether it's local governments or, host country governments in faraway places or communities, we sort of automatically grasp that we're going to have to bridge some gaps. What I find really interesting today is that we are dealing with a whole new set of stakeholders and we expect perfect understanding. So I do a lot of work for US and EU policy shapers trying to bridge the gaps between what they think, hear, or wish of the mining and minerals industry. So already we're talking about a topic nobody can really cover. And a lot of them are really put off by the fact that it's hard for them to grasp the usual sort of, places where they connect. And I think as much difficulty as we may have talking amongst ourselves, dealing with this whole new group of stakeholders and reaching out to them and making ourselves understood is vital, and it's a hard job. And I really see there the lack of trust, but also the fact that we don't use the same words for the same things. I am regularly asked in those discussions, so what is exactly your area of expertise? And it tends to create huge stress when I say I'm a really good generalist. So I think all of these conversations we're having almost amongst ourselves, we all connect to some aspect of mineral value chains. Bringing them to people who are trying to understand mining, regulate it or shift it towards their priorities at the same time as we're shifting around all the time, I think that's a huge endeavor. So I'm just very aware that each of us also connects to these policy shapers, and I'd love to know how you're taking all of this experience to those conversations.
Thanks for that, Ludovine. We'll come back to that in a second. I've just got one more question to ask you, and that is, So we're all sitting here looking at one another going, oh, yes, we've got people from all over the world, but we're all speaking English. I suspect most of us use a knife and a fork to eat from a cultural perspective. Within the world at the moment, and Amanda, you spoke about China, for example, and I think perhaps a lot of the fear that is within raw material supply chains at the moment is because we don't understand one another. We're very different from a cultural basis, etc. I've had the opportunity to work a little bit within China, and again, as soon as you start understanding one another, it's fantastic. But before you get to that point, you're terrified of offending other people in the room. So there's something here as well, Ludovine, perhaps around in that broad interconnected mineral space that, again, from a cultural perspective and a country perspective, certain parts of the world are very anti-China. Other parts of the world are more open to working with China. But I think there's also a base underlining of we just don't really understand one another because we're so different. Is that, I mean, what do you think of that as a comment?
I think that's really true. And I think when you hear those positions, what's even more important is trying to understand the stories we tell ourselves and we tell each other about those positions. So most of my work happens in Africa. And I hear a lot of assumptions about how African countries, stakeholders could position, on the EU versus US versus China kind of, discussion. And I think part of the problem is we are telling ourselves stories about China, we're telling ourselves stories about ourselves, and everybody else is telling themselves stories about the same thing. So taking the time to hear those stories is interesting. I also think there are many cultures where the official story does not reflect the lived story. In most of the countries where I work in West Africa, there is an official version that's carried by somebody who is allowed to speak. There are a whole series of stakeholders who may violently disagree, but would never say it out loud. So, we're bridging visible and invisible gaps, so to speak. I'm very interested right now and sometimes concerned by the narratives, the stories we tell about CRM needs, about how we plan to use CRMs, how those stories are received elsewhere. And this was mentioned yesterday in the other session. The way we speak about metal demand as being an absolute, oddly, does not really help with shaping a collaborative answer to that demand and to that need. And then when you pile in with everything Amanda told us, which is, no, we absolutely demand it and need it, but we may change our mind in 3 days because, we might change technologies. There are a lot of stakeholders who say, well, come back when you know. Of course, by that point, the 10 years of exploration that we need, are no longer possible. So we're dealing with stories, but also with timelines on how these stories play out.
Thanks for that, Ludovine. So stories, timelines, visible and invisible bridges. Fantastic. So just to wrap up on this morning's session, maybe Amanda, if I come to yourself first, seeing as you were cited a number of times just there, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with us or reflections with regards to what you've heard? And then I'll go to Kimmo.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of elephants in the room in materials. One of the things I'd like to say, and this is a personal opinion, is the geopolitical tug of war going on between China and the rest of the world, with places like Africa in the middle, is huge. And China needs a little bit of credit. They saw the need for raw materials and different raw materials and raw material supply chains before we did. They were willing to go around the world and secure those supply chains, and they have spent a huge amount of time understanding the complexities of how those supply chains work. We have just woken up as if we were in a stupor, and after spending 10 years screaming about climate change, we realize the practical realities of what we need to do, or some of them, not all of them, some of the practical realities, because I don't think the West has any idea what it really needs to do to energy transition, or it's got this much of an idea, there's this much more to do. And they're like, well, China stole it all and China's a nasty person, don't work with them. But they're completely disrespecting the amount of time and effort and work and understanding China has developed in this area, and how much work we need to do. And we do have, all the people in this room are experts in their own way in the raw materials and understanding all the stakeholders. But the global raw materials supply chains are really complex worlds full of stakeholders, and we need to understand them if we're going to make the energy transition. And my sort of, what I have to say is there's a combination of understanding and reality, and realities, business realities, geostatistical realities that we need to understand if we're going to make the energy transition. And making an attempt to understand all of that before saying, I want this, is going to be essential, because we are never going to get an energy transition if we demand it. We're going to get it if we roll up our sleeves and try to understand the complexities of getting one.
Excellent. Thanks, Amanda. We're not going to get it if we demand it. We actually have to do something. So brilliant. Thank you. Kimmo, do you have any final reflections? And then I'll go to Gijsbert.
Thank you. So I think that we are in a difficult situation. We need mining more than ever, and this need offers great opportunities for mining business. But at the same time, mining must change to get the social license to operate in that scale that the world is needing. But the problem is that perhaps the mining companies, the growth that they are looking for, it's possible that the growth rate that they are looking for can be achieved without any huge changes, but that growth rate is not enough for the global needs. So how we can make the needs of mining sector to meet the needs of rest of the world and develop together the more responsible and more sustainable mining. I think it's possible. If some other sectors has done that, why not mining? But there's great need to cooperate from to different stakeholders, and that's excellent. That what we have done today, we need much more of this kind of common understanding events. So thank you, Sarah, for arranging this. And I'm really sorry, I need to jump out. I start another webinar in 3 minutes.
Oh, good luck. Thank you very, very much, Kimmo. It's been fantastic.
So much, and it was so good to hear all of you. Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Gijsbert, I wouldn't take that as an offensive gesture by the Finn. I believe that he did have another webinar, and I say this with a big smile on my face just to make sure that nobody is misunderstanding my British sarcasm there at all. But Gijsbert, do you have any reflections? And then we'll finish off with Vanessa.
Yeah, well, I think we're underestimating the transition, that what the energy transition, or doing something about climate change, or however you want to phrase this, what this actually means in practice. I think, you know, discussions about trust and about setting common goals and understanding are fundamental, and to create awareness and also the humility to really recognize, okay, well, we do certain things that might not be beneficial and we need to change, related to, for example, saying that you're a leader in ESG or a leader in this or that. That is a kind of a closing statement. We need to be much more open, I think, and pragmatic, and also kind of move on in a I think communal emotional growth. Europe has been for quite a while been at the forefront, to use that word, of driving awareness around climate change, and screaming at the Americans and the Chinese, for example, to do something about it. Now they do something, and it's also not good. So come on, just celebrate that and start doing your own thing, and add to that, and really take that to the next level. Because one thing I'm a bit worried about is that we say that, well, in Europe we can leverage and enforce standards and ESG targets, etc., by leveraging the single market. But if we don't produce anything, we don't have a single market. We cannot afford it. Maybe it sounds a bit blunt, but I think we need to very much look at building also industrial capacity in Europe to make a change. And this relates to some of the other speakers talking about pragmatic steps, because otherwise, if we don't have the tools to have a sustainable economy, we only are sustainable, and Europe becomes green for the wrong reasons. So on that positive note,
I'll let you go back to picking mushrooms. Thank you very, very much, Gijsbert. Fantastic. And to finish with, we'll go all the way down to Western Australia. Vanessa, any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I do see that we're nearly out of time, so I will be brief. Probably the big thing that I just loved about this conversation is our honesty to realize that we've got to do better, and really looking at bringing in all of those skills that we all have, but in a way that we've just got to do it better. But there are two things that really stuck out for me, and I've never heard of social vectors before, and I don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to be doing in that. But Ludovine, you said something that just, I think it was you, where you just said we've got new groups of stakeholders that we've never had before, and we need to communicate with them about things that their knowledge of might not be, the same as what ChatGPT used to give us that idea right at the beginning. So I wanted to end on that by saying, with our ability and our knowledge, and maybe being honest and acknowledging that we do need to speak with maybe a bit more authority in what we don't know, I think that's a fairly good place to say, well, I don't know all of these things, but you've got some help, and let's work on this together. Because I do believe it's possible. So I do believe that trusted mining is possible.
I think there's absolutely, Vanessa. And so I think to finish on that note of vectors, so Chris and Emily, I'll give it another push. So on Friday afternoon, come along to the open launch. It's an open research program. So if you want to come and explore what is actually meant by social vectors, the big secret is we don't know yet. I suspect, is that the case, Chris? Emily? So it's part of what's being researched as part of the program, which is great. So yes, admitting that there's loads of stuff that people don't know about. And then as well, to give Emily's request a push, if anybody is interested or knows of somebody that you think might enjoy being a part of the independent ethics committee for the research project, then please do feel free to get in touch with Emily, or go on the Vector website or take a look at those QR codes. Thank you very much, Chris. There we go. So with that, everybody, it's just gone 11 o'clock for me here in the UK. We've got our second last session of this year's Responsible Raw Materials Conference happening later on this afternoon. So it kicks off at 3 o'clock and rolls through to 6 o'clock UK time, which of course is just about okay for all of the lovely people in North and South America. This afternoon, we're being joined by everyone from Carlos for the Ministry of Mining in Chile, all the way through to individuals who work with lots of different communities in Alaska with regards to mining projects. And again, of course, we've got one or two experts sprinkled throughout who maybe don't do a lot with mining, but do a lot with regards to trust. We will then finish off this year's conference tomorrow morning. So starting off again at 8 a.m. UK time and finishing at 11. And at which point in time, Ludovine, Rose and I will attempt to summarize what we have heard this year, which is going to be a challenge. isn't it, Ludovine? I don't know how we're going to do this year, but we'll pull something out the hat, which will be great. So with that, thank you so much to this morning's speakers. It's been absolutely glorious. And thank you so much, Gijsbert, for making us laugh. Brilliant. Round of applause. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was great. Great to be part of.
Brilliant. See you all later. Thanks very much, everybody.